Usually, a crime begins with a clue. However, in the murder of Karen Pannell, everything began with a message written in blood. A single word on the white wall of the kitchen. The word could have been a dying woman's last desperate words, or an elaborate plan devised by a killer to deceive others. Karen Pannell, 39, was a vibrant woman. She had overcome illness, trauma, and multiple toxic relationships, believing she had finally found peace. But just hours after what seemed like an ordinary evening, she was found lying in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor, stabbed repeatedly in a rage that shocked even seasoned investigators. As police traced Karen's relationships, a series of secrets were exposed: lies, control, and the men who had hurt her. When the truth surfaced, it exposed a disturbing web of jealousy, deceit, and an elaborate plot to frame someone innocent, all designed to conceal the true killer Karen never suspected. Karen Pannell was born on February 10, 1964, in Germany. As a child, she moved with her family to Georgia, USA. She was the youngest of 6 children, with 5 older brothers. Because her father served in the military, the family often moved from one city, or even one country, to another. Karen graduated from high school in Warner Robins, Georgia, before the family relocated to Tampa, Florida. Here, she continued her studies and earned a diploma, then chose to become a flight attendant. In addition, she also worked as a part-time model thanks to her outstanding figure and appearance. Friends and family described her as positive, optimistic, kind, and deeply connected to her loved ones. She hoped to start her own family someday, though her romantic relationships often proved troublesome. In love, Karen often encountered men who controlled, abused, and treated her badly. She quickly broke up with them because she could not accept oppression and disrespect. However, she was married, but the marriage lasted 5 years and ended in divorce. After a difficult divorce, Karen was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. This shock left her devastated and depressed, but thanks to the encouragement and support of family and friends, she gradually regained her spirit. Despite her illness, she remained positive, even more optimistic than before. In time, Karen met Timothy Parmenter at a Volkswagen dealership, where he worked as a manager. They connected instantly, and their relationship quickly blossomed. This relationship made her believe that she had finally met a good man. Unlike her previous negative experiences, Karen continued working as a customer service manager for the airline and believed that the future had many bright things ahead. However, on the morning of October 11, 2003, Karen, then 39 years old, did not show up for her regular shift at American Airlines. Her unannounced late arrival worried her coworkers and manager, as this was unprecedented. When no one could reach her, her supervisor called her boyfriend, Timothy, to ask if he knew where she was. Timothy said he hadn't seen her since the previous evening. She had seemed healthy and cheerful, and he couldn't think of any reason she would have missed work. Concerned, he decided to check on her himself. Around 10:30 a.m., Timothy arrived at Karen's home. Her car was still in the garage, suggesting she was inside. The front door was unlocked. Calling her name, he got no response. The house was silent. As he walked toward the kitchen, he found Karen lying motionless on the floor. The room was covered in blood. On the floor, walls, and furniture, it was clear a brutal attack had taken place. Panicked and horrified, Timothy called 911. The dispatcher tried to assist as he struggled to stay calm. Timothy told the operator he wasn't sure if Karen was still alive but couldn't bring himself to approach her or attempt first aid, saying he couldn't handle the sight of blood. He begged emergency responders to arrive quickly. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at Karen Pannell's home. When officers got there, They found Timothy standing in the driveway beside his car. He looked terrified. He had vomited several times and could barely speak. Even so, his fragmented words made it clear that something horrible had happened. Inside the house, police immediately saw that Karen was dead. She was lying in a pool of blood, with 16 stab wounds concentrated on her upper body. The attacker had stabbed her through the heart and slashed her neck and chest. Her arms were covered in defensive wounds, showing that she had fought back fiercely. A forensic expert later concluded that several of her injuries could have been fatal. The attacker was so violent that a stab to her neck even damaged her spinal cord. While forensic teams examined the crime scene, Timothy was taken to the station for questioning. By then, he had calmed down slightly, but was still clearly shaken. Timothy explained that the day before, October 10, he had visited her for dinner and a chat. She brought him a small gift, a kitten calendar, because she loved cats and wanted him to think of her when he saw it. They spent a pleasant evening together. According to Timothy, he left Karen's house around 7:30 p.m., the last time he saw her alive. He said nothing unusual had happened. Karen had been cheerful, they hadn't argued, and she was preparing for work the next day. Detectives wondered why he hadn't stayed overnight, as it was a Friday. He told them that Karen always worked early on Saturdays, so it made no sense for him to stay over. He wanted to sleep in that weekend. After leaving Karen's home, Timothy said he returned to his apartment but didn't plan to stay there long. Around 9:30 p.m., he called his friend George Solomon, and they agreed to meet later at a bar. Timothy drove to George's house in the Moon Lake area of Florida, about an hour from Karen's home. He arrived shortly after 10:30 p.m., and the two spent the night out drinking. Both George and his girlfriend later confirmed Timothy's story, stating he had been with them the entire evening. From the start, Timothy cooperated fully with investigators. He was transparent and readily admitted his criminal past. When he was just 20 years old, he was convicted of violence and served about 10 years in prison. He had been released less than a year before Karen's murder. Timothy's honesty made the police believe that he was unlikely to be the perpetrator. The test results showed that there were no signs of a struggle on his body, while Karen had many bruises, indicating that she had resisted fiercely. This proved that the attacker could have been injured and could not have easily escaped without leaving a trace. At the scene, investigators collected numerous pieces of evidence. On the kitchen table was a pizza box from the evening of October 10th, with only 3 slices missing. Outside, they found a utility box with electrical wires that had been forced open. This suggested to investigators that the murder might have occurred during an attempted burglary. Perhaps the intruders intended to cut the home's power. However, no fingerprints were found on the utility box. In the kitchen, police found Karen's wallet tossed carelessly on the stove. It was empty, as if someone had taken the contents quickly. The most disturbing discovery, though, was graffiti written in blood on the wall near Karen's body. The word was clearly spelled out rock. Blood was found on the index finger of Karen's right hand, suggesting she may have written the word herself before dying. Possibly a final clue to identify her killer. Investigators now needed to determine who or what rock referred to. To do so, they began digging into Karen's past, especially her personal relationships. They soon learned that Rock was Karen's ex-boyfriend, a man named Rock Herpich. She had been dating him for several months, and those who knew her knew their relationship was extremely abusive and toxic. Even Timothy said he had often heard Rock's name mentioned in a negative way. Rock worked at an auto repair shop and met Karen shortly after her divorce and her diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. At first, Rock seemed caring and affectionate. He courted Karen attentively, and she began to trust him, eventually inviting him to move into her home. He supported her through medical appointments and daily needs. However, friends and family noticed how quickly the relationship was progressing, which worried them. Not long after, Rock revealed his true nature, rude and aggressive. When checking his background, the detectives discovered that he had a minor criminal record related to illegal substances, though he had never been severely punished. After they moved in together, the relationship quickly deteriorated. Karen often appeared with bruises, and following one violent argument, Rock assaulted her. She reported the incident to police and ended the relationship. But the harassment did not stop. Over time, he resumed contacting her. Detectives examined their text messages. Rock seemed mostly concerned about retrieving a desk he had left at her house. Karen, however, told friends she refused to give it back, believing it was just an excuse for him to re-enter her life. Instead of negotiating, Karen completely cut off contact. Phone records showed that Rock gradually stopped reaching out. When detectives interviewed him, he was cooperative and straightforward about their relationship. He admitted it had been toxic and said both were at fault. According to him, Karen sometimes started arguments and even threw objects at him. He said that after the breakup, he just wanted his desk back. But when Karen refused, he let it go and did not contact her again. When told that his name had been written in Karen's blood on the wall where she was killed, Rock firmly denied any involvement. He acknowledged being considered a suspect, but insisted that he was innocent and willing to cooperate with the investigation. Rock waived his right to a lawyer and provided fingerprints and DNA samples voluntarily. Like Timothy, he was examined for any signs of recent violence, but investigators found none. He appeared calm and sincere in denying any connection to the crime. Rock said that he was with his new girlfriend the night of the murder, and she confirmed his statement. Investigators now faced a new question: why had his name been written in blood at the crime scene? They considered that it could have been a deliberate attempt by the real killer to mislead them. To investigate further, they sent the section of wall trim with the inscription to a forensic lab. There, experts found dried blood spatter beneath the writing, which proved the name had been added later, after the initial blood had partially dried. This led investigators to determine exactly how long it would have taken for the blood to dry enough for someone to write on it without smearing, using animal blood for realistic testing. Forensic analysts concluded it would take at least 20 minutes for blood to reach that stage of drying. They noted it was highly unlikely that Karen could have survived, conscious, for that long after suffering 16 stab wounds. Still, an official report was needed to identify who had written the name. Investigators then checked for fingerprints on the panel. None were found, even though smearing the blood should have left some trace. A detective recalled finding a gardening glove in the kitchen, but only one. The other was missing and never found. Suspicion deepened when Karen's relatives revealed that she was left-handed. That meant the blood-stained index finger on her right hand had been staged. At that point, detectives were convinced that the killer had written Rock's name deliberately to mislead the investigation. When the official forensic report was released, it was clear that Karen could not have written anything on the wall herself. Her spinal cord was 90% damaged during the attack, which would have left her completely paralyzed and certain to die. According to experts, she lost blood in just minutes, meaning she was dead long before investigators believed the message was written. It was physically impossible for her to have written the graffiti. Once this was confirmed, Rock was cleared as a suspect. His name came up at first, but he had a solid alibi, confirmed both by his phone's geolocation and by a new girlfriend who testified on his behalf. Furthermore, if the writing was not done by Karen, then it would make no sense for Rock to have written it himself to incriminate himself. Someone was clearly setting him up. At that point, Timothy once again stepped in and suggested the investigators look into Karen's ex-husband, Jeff Payne. The two had been married for 5 years and were currently arguing over alimony. Karen needed extra money for her medical treatments and had been pressing Jeff to pay. Detectives soon contacted Jeff. He confirmed he was in another city when the murder occurred. Karen's other boyfriend, a British Airways pilot she had dated in the past, was also away at the time and had a strong alibi. He had no motive either. The robbery theory was quickly ruled out as well. Robbers rarely kill their victims, leave valuables untouched, or take the time to write the names of ex-boyfriends on walls. This clearly wasn't a robbery gone wrong. The motive was personal, yet the suspect list was empty. Investigators began to suspect that the attacker was someone who knew Karen personally, someone who had argued with her, desired her, or felt jealousy toward her. They reviewed every man she had been involved with. There weren't many, and all but one were far from her home on the night of the killing. The only one nearby was Timothy. Despite his confident demeanor and a seemingly solid alibi supported by witnesses, Timothy's name kept surfacing in the investigation. Detectives decided to dig deeper into his past with Karen, uncovering a web of lies. At first, Karen told her family that she believed she had finally found a trustworthy, decent man. But her optimism faded quickly. Much of Timothy's backstory turned out to be fabricated. He had told her he was a former Navy SEAL who had taken part in secret operations, an explanation meant to justify the scars on his body. Later, he confessed that this was a complete lie. In reality, he had spent about 10 years in prison for pimping. His scars came from a rough life on the streets and violent encounters behind bars. He claimed he had lied only because he was ashamed and afraid of losing her. Timothy told Karen that he had fallen in love with her at first sight and wanted her to see him as someone admirable. He hoped that, over time, she would learn to trust him and accept his past. But that never happened. After his confession, Karen admitted to friends and family that she was afraid of him and wanted to end the relationship. Karen's older brother told detectives that one of her former boyfriends had repeatedly beaten her. He had urged her to report the abuse to the police, but she refused. The abuse became evident one day when she attended a meeting wearing a scarf, even though it was 90 degrees Fahrenheit. When she removed it, bruises from strangulation were visible. She told her brother that Timothy had choked her during yet another argument. Despite her brother's efforts to help, she chose to remain silent. She believed that things would eventually pass, as they had with previous violent men in her life. Many suspected that the abuse in Karen and Timothy's relationship was a recurring pattern. The most obvious sign came that summer in July. Karen began wearing long-sleeve sweatshirts to cover herself. Despite the extremely hot weather in Florida, when detectives questioned Timothy, he admitted to frequent arguments and deception, but claimed that was the only way he could manage a relationship with her. Timothy denied ever hitting Karen or causing her injuries. Investigators reviewed their evidence, focusing on a pizza box found at the scene, fingerprints belonging to Karen, Timothy, and the delivery man were recovered. Using the receipt, police confirmed that the pizza had been delivered at 8:48 p.m. Timothy, however, claimed he had already left Karen's house an hour earlier. Detectives questioned how his fingerprints could be on the box, suggesting it wasn't accidental. Timothy insisted he might have touched it the next morning when he visited to check on her after discovering the body. Investigators then located the pizza delivery man. He confirmed that when he handed the order to Karen, a man stood behind her looking upset. Shown a photo of Timothy, the delivery man identified him as that man. Phone records revealed that Timothy had called his friend George at 9:36 p.m. He said he made the call from his apartment, but geolocation data showed it came from Karen's home, further strengthening suspicions against him. During questioning, detectives confronted Timothy with these inconsistencies. He buried his head in his hands and fell silent for several minutes. When he looked up, his demeanor seemed completely changed. His eyes darkened, and his face went pale. Detectives later described it as though the mild-tempered Timothy had vanished, replaced by something cold and menacing. They couldn't help but wonder what he might have been capable of in moments like that. Such reactions often precede a confession. But Timothy refused to cooperate. He simply stated that he would be accused of murder only because he was the one who discovered Karen's body. Detectives believed they understood what had happened. Karen had likely told Timothy she wanted to end their relationship after the pizza arrived. and the argument escalated until, in a fit of rage, he killed her. Timothy was charged with first-degree murder. The upcoming trial would be difficult, as much of the evidence was circumstantial. The prosecution relied heavily on witness testimony from Karen's friends and family, as well as the supporting physical evidence. Although they had the murder weapon and proof of Timothy's lies, the case remained risky. Then, 4 weeks before the trial, Timothy's friend George, who had been his alibi, contacted the police. George confirmed his earlier statement that Timothy had come to his house that night and that they later went to a bar. However, George also confessed that when Timothy arrived at his house, Timothy had confessed to killing Karen. George claimed that Timothy had pressured him to stay silent, but now he could no longer hide the truth and was willing to testify against his friend in court. His testimony greatly strengthened the prosecution's case. Even so, it took nearly 4 years to gather all the evidence and prepare for trial. Timothy continued to plead not guilty. As expected, the defense focused on pointing out the weaknesses in the evidence against Timothy. He tried to discredit the prosecution's arguments by emphasizing Timothy's cooperation during the investigation, his apparent remorse, and his positive reintegration into society after serving time in prison. It is hard to deny that before Karen's case happened, Timothy was regarded as a citizen with a good reputation. No signs of physical injury were found on Timothy's body, even though the medical examiner confirmed that Karen had fought desperately for her life. Additionally, Timothy did not leave any DNA traces under Karen's fingernails. The question of how he avoided injury and destroyed evidence remains unanswered, and the lawyer used this to his client's advantage. The prosecution's key witness was Timothy's friend George. On the stand, George described in detail what had happened on the night of October 10th. He said Timothy had called him, saying there was something he needed to confess, but Timothy didn't reveal it over the phone. When Timothy arrived at George's house, he confessed to killing Karen. According to him, they had argued before the murder. Karen reproached him for losing his job at the car dealership, which made him feel insulted and that she had no sympathy for him. The argument intensified. Karen had planned to end their relationship after learning about Timothy's criminal past. Losing control, Timothy grabbed a knife from her kitchen. George also recalled that Timothy described how he staged the crime scene to mislead investigators. First, Timothy used Karen's right index finger to write Rock's name on the wall, hoping to trap Rock. Second, he emptied her wallet to make it look like a robbery. Third, he tampered with the electrical panel. These details had never appeared in press reports, which made George's testimony sound credible. Other witnesses, including Karen's neighbors, also testified for the prosecution. Some said Timothy's car was parked in her driveway late into the night, while others claimed it was parked farther away. Their conflicting statements added to the confusion. The defense argued that Timothy was being framed and used as a scapegoat, so the case could be closed quickly. They claimed he had simply misjudged the time he left Karen's house and had only touched the knitting needle box when he discovered the body. The defense lawyer also called George a liar, noting that no bloodstains were found on Timothy's clothes that night, something others at the bar would have easily noticed. The prosecution countered that Timothy had launched a sudden attack, stabbing Karen in the back, paralyzing her so she couldn't resist. This, they said, explained the lack of visible struggle. According to the prosecution, Timothy then continued stabbing Karen until she died. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the verdict, Timothy said he wasn't surprised but still maintained his innocence. He insisted that someday the truth would come out and prove him blameless. Love is a wonderful feeling that inspires books, music, and films. However, if it's a perverted love, held by a sick individual, it can be devastating, shattering many lives. Similarly, wealth can easily corrupt, causing a person to lose self-control. When feelings are added to this volatile mix, the outcome is rarely positive. Dion Andrea Bao, an immigrant from Jamaica, possessed a striking beauty. She planned to attend college in Atlanta, USA, focusing on finance. She moved to America with her husband, also a Jamaican native, named Sean Nelson, a Jamaica Airlines pilot. They met in Miami nightclub in 1988. Dion was always drawn to wealth. In the 1982nd and 92nd, being a pilot was a prestigious position. They earned a good income and could afford a comfortable lifestyle. However, Sean's job had its downsides. He spent little time at home. 2 years into the relationship, they decided to move to Georgia. Sean was content with his job and life. Dion worked as a secretary at a large company while continuing her education and becoming other. Despite Sean's prestigious and well-paid job, disagreements began to surface. Dion felt he lacked ambition and had no prospects for advancement, which frustrated her. Dion believed he should continue to develop professionally. She pushed him to change careers and go into business, suggesting that her financial education could help them create a family company. She also hoped this would keep him home more. He resisted, so Dion decided to take matters into her own hands. Then, Sean's frequent absences now worked to her advantage. Instead of devoting her free time to her baby, Dion began searching for a man who could offer her a better lifestyle. In April 1996, Dion, working as a secretary, had access to the office mail. One day, she saw an invitation to an exclusive party for wealthy individuals. She recognized this as a chance to meet wealthy and influential people, hoping it would help her achieve her desire for wealth and luxury. Dion asked her boss about the invitation. He explained it was a birthday party for Lance Herndon, a tech mogul. Naturally, Dion was very interested in attending. Initially, her boss was hesitant because she didn't know anyone there. However, impressed by her ambition and confidence, he thought her presence would be well received. Dion's manager learned that another employee had also received an invitation, but didn't plan to go. He convinced that employee to pass the invitation to Dion. She had gotten her way and could now attend a privileged party for the upper crust of society. By this point, she had little interest in her husband and child, wanting only to gain access to U.S. high society and become rich and famous. Lance Herndon's 41st birthday was a golden opportunity for the young woman. He was a well-known Atlanta multimillionaire who made his fortune in the technology business. He owned a company called Access, Inc., focused on integrating high technology into the city's 911 emergency service program. He aimed to expand it. With a deep understanding of computers and advanced solutions, during his career, Lance was recognized as one of the 500 best entrepreneurs in the United States. He even met with President Bill Clinton, who praised his work. Lance was a hard worker, a trait instilled in him by his paternal grandfather who taught him to wake up early and work efficiently. He had 3 alarm clocks in his bedroom, set for 3:40 a.m., 3:50 a.m., and 4 o'clock a.m. Upon waking, he immediately began his workday, delegating tasks to his employees. His house was in the same building as his company's offices. He lived on the first floor, which had a separate entrance, while the rest of the employees worked on the upper floors. Waking up at 4 o'clock a.m., Lance would go to his office upstairs and write messages for the employees who would arrive later. He provided them with instructions, laying them out at their workstations so they knew what to do upon arrival. People willingly worked at his company for many years and were well compensated. Everyone saw in Lance a reasonable and sensitive leader, focused on success. Thanks to his meticulousness and love for his business, he achieved everything one could only dream of. The company flourished in the 90s, and Atlanta became a hub of social life, with Lance becoming a prominent figure, working from Monday to Friday. He didn't forget about rest. On weekends, he often threw private parties. In addition to success and fame, he had weaknesses. His main vice was beautiful women. However, he wasn't conventionally attractive. A short man with a simple appearance, he didn't attract many women in his youth. But when he became wealthy, many women pursued him. By this point, he had been married 3 times. Shortly before the party Dion wanted to attend, he got divorced again. To those close to him, the reason for this breakup was no secret. His infidelity. Women loved him. He was famous, rich, and generous with gifts. He spent thousands of dollars on his mistresses every week, even more than he gave to his wife. She grew tired of enduring his infidelity. So, when the position of Lance Herndon's wife became vacant once again in 1996, the competition was fierce. However, being the next Mrs. Herndon wasn't so pleasant. In fact, 2 of Lance's wives couldn't even stay in the relationship until their first anniversary. Lance quickly lost interest in his lovers, after which he usually offered them money and ended the relationship. Back to 1990. Janine Price became Lance's next wife. Many in the man's circle believed she was the most worthy partner for him. Immediately after their marriage, they began working on their dream home, a 6,000 square meter mansion. Most of their neighbors were wealthy individuals, and construction was underway in a prestigious area in the Roswell suburb of Atlanta. During the same period, the first disagreements appeared. Janine didn't like her husband's approach to business. Even the fact that he left notes for his employees early in the morning, and then went off to do his own thing and practically didn't contact anyone. She considered it selfish. Lance himself was sure that direct communication with ordinary workers was a waste of time. Law of repetition. Lance lost interest in Janine pretty quickly. By this time, Janine was already pregnant with their future son. She noticed that Lance's interest faded. He practically stopped communicating with her, and soon she found out that he was dating and even sleeping with others. For some time, she endured all this, hoping to save the family, expecting that her husband would show interest in her again. But by the time their child was born, she could no longer stand his behavior. Janine decided to break up because of numerous betrayals. So, by his 41st birthday, Lance Herndon was again on the market. Having received an invitation to a party, Dion began to prepare carefully. In April 1996, she found herself at a private party organized by multimillionaire Lance Herndon. She chose the best outfit, did stunning makeup, and styled her hair. There were more than 400 people gathered there, all of them representatives of the privileged community of Atlanta. Despite the fact that Dion didn't know anyone there, she looked so amazing. However, she wasn't interested in these people. She wanted the main attraction, Lance. At this time, Lance didn't communicate much with the guests who came. He usually took a place in the corner of the rented room with a large table and a sofa, sat, and talked with women. He had a habit of keeping a piece of paper on which each woman could write her name and phone number. This piece of paper was never empty. At some point during the evening, Lance found himself drawn to a petite woman with captivating brown eyes, who seemed to be watching him. It was Dion. Despite not being invited, and knowing no one else at the party, she somehow managed to capture the attention of the host himself. In the midst of the celebration, Lance approached her, introduced himself as Lance Herndon, and struck up a conversation. They spent the rest of the evening together, chatting amiably. He obtained Dion's phone number, and from the very next day, their relationship began to blossom. Lance frequently told his inner circle that he had finally met the most stunning woman in Atlanta. This wasn't entirely new behavior. He typically showered his new lovers with both compliments and extravagant gifts. Within a couple of weeks, a brand new luxury Mercedes appeared in Dion's driveway. She had completely charmed him. He seemed to have lost his head. She willingly accepted any amount of money he offered, to the point where he even gave her his credit card. During this period, Dion was still married. However, her husband and son quickly became secondary in her life. Shaun, returning from yet another flight, was understandably surprised to see his wife driving such an expensive car. When he inquired about it, Dion explained that she had a new business coach who was mentoring her. Dion laughed at his old used car and occasionally allowed he to drive her new car. Although Dion was not yet ready to leave her husband, she certainly couldn't give up her newfound luxurious lifestyle, especially since her husband, being a pilot, I was away for weeks at a time, leaving her with ample opportunity to spend time with Lance. Her husband found her excuse somewhat convincing. The car did not arouse much suspicion, but returning from another flight, he found out that his wife had moved to a new big house. In response to his questions, she said that she had been saving money for a long time. Of course, it was a lie. Sean suspected deception and demanded proof of her alleged savings. But Dion simply avoided the question. Now, he really doubted this, so he decided to take his child back to his family in Jamaica. Little did he know that this was exactly what Dion wanted. She could now freely devote all of her time to Lance, hoping to become the next Mrs. Herndon. It remains unclear whether she ever told Lance about her husband and child. Regardless, he willingly entered into a serious relationship with her. Soon, he had a pretty secretary with a Jamaican accent who would rush to his office at a moment's notice in a gifted car. However, Dion wasn't the only one engaged in deception. Lance, too, was a deceiver. His accountant was his own mother, a fact that was far from coincidental. He needed someone he could trust implicitly to keep the true state of his company a secret. The harsh reality was that his accounts were nearly empty. He was broke due to his exorbitant spending on parties and women. His credit cards were tens of thousands of dollars in debt, but he couldn't bring himself to stop and adopt a more modest lifestyle. Lance's mother was fully aware of the situation but kept it a secret. Her primary concern was to ensure that taxes were paid and that the staff received their salaries on time, so that no one would suspect a thing. Approximately 2 months into his relationship with Dion, Lance's total debts reached almost $500,000. The lovers' relationship had developed rapidly, but then things began to follow his usual pattern. Sometime after they met, Lance began to lose interest. During this period, he spent between $20,000 and $40,000 each month on his mistress. She quickly became addicted to the wealthy life, filling her wardrobe exclusively with designer clothes and even refusing to wear the same outfits twice. Lance did not want to tell her the truth. According to his standard scenario, he gradually began to limit communication, assuming that everything would soon come to naught. Dion, however, proved to be far more persistent than the American women Lance was accustomed to dealing with. Despite his persistent ignoring of her calls, Dion began seeking out opportunities to meet him. Now, instead of money, he offered her only excuses. This was easy for him, as he had a cheat sheet with a list of the most beautiful women in Atlanta. For Dion, all this was a big blow. Now Dion's replacement is Kathy Collins, whom Lance met in Los Angeles in 1989. They kept in touch regularly over the years, but Kathy doesn't seem particularly attractive, at least not enough to be his fourth wife. Nevertheless, her photo took up space on his nightstand. During this same period, he was also communicating with Talana Caraway, an employee of his company, whom he paid personally for small administrative tasks. Not realizing the true scale of what was happening, Dion continued her desperate attempts to establish contact. But she was already considered written off like all the other young women. She kept calling and became increasingly aggressive. It became obvious that she wouldn't take no for an answer. Now, Lance described her to his friends as a real hysteric who behaved inappropriately, but Dion could no longer back down. She had received so much money from him that she was overcome with greed and couldn't stop. On July 10, 1996, she put on her best outfit and perfect makeup, ensured that Lance wouldn't be able to refuse her and that she would receive a lot of money again. Late in the evening, she went to his house, but before she reached the door, she noticed another woman inside. The plan suddenly failed. Furious, she ran to the door and began banging on it, screaming hysterically. Instead of going out to her, Lance claimed he didn't know who she was and called the police. When the patrol cars arrived, Dion was still hysterical. She was even more enraged that Lance was acting as if he didn't know her at all. She claimed that she had been dating him for months and that he paid all her bills. But because of her behavior, no one listened to her. Lance was also furious. He blocked the credit card he had given to Dion, and a statement was made about an attempted break-in, meaning Dion could end up behind bars. Naturally, this made her even angrier. In August, the situation began to escalate. A trial was coming, which could send Dion to prison, something she couldn't allow. Lance completely cut off her financial support. Finally, Dion was on the verge of divorce from her husband. Lance continued his exorbitant spending and met a new girl, spending time with her. On August 8, 1996, he attended a celebration dedicated to the Olympic Games, then picked up his 92-year-old grandmother from the airport. His ex-wife, Janine, decided to help with his grandmother. Then, he met Talana Caraway. They had already had several dates, and Lance wanted to get to know her better. Talana left the office at 10:37 p.m., and when she came home at 11 o'clock p.m., she received a message from Lance. Talana called him. They laughed together, chatted for a few minutes, and both went to bed. The next morning, the 9th of August, at around 8 o'clock a.m., the company employees arrived for work. However, this day was unlike any other. The usual instructions Lance, their manager, left were missing. This was very strange and uncharacteristic of him, leaving everyone confused and unsure of what to do. The residential area of the building was off-limits to regular employees, so they had to wait for Lance's mother to arrive. She went down to the residential section and screamed. She ran back out and frantically called emergency services, explaining that she had found her son in bed, covered in blood. The operator tried to obtain more details, but the woman was too distraught to speak clearly. The bloody scene had shocked her deeply. When paramedics and law enforcement officers arrived, they confirmed that 41-year-old Lance Herndon was dead. He was lying on his back, with his arms crossed over his chest. An examination revealed he had suffered at least a dozen blows to the face with a blunt object. There were no signs of forced entry. All 3 alarm clocks Lance used were turned off. His wallet and several credit cards were left on the dresser in the bedroom. But the shirt and pants he had worn the night before were missing. In the master bathroom, a bloody pillowcase, likely used to wipe the murder weapon, was found in the toilet. His laptop and an expensive ring were missing near the garage. A chewing gum wrapper was also found. Lance's mother noticed a crucial detail: a photo of Kathy, his longtime girlfriend, which he usually kept on his nightstand, was turned face down. The medical examiner determined the murder took place between 2 o'clock a.m. and 4 o'clock a.m., and that an adjustable wrench, recently used by Lance, had been used as the murder weapon and was now missing. The tool had been lying in a visible place, easily accessible. Considering Lance's promiscuous lifestyle, the murder appeared to be a crime of passion. The police immediately began questioning relatives, searching for anyone who had recently behaved aggressively towards Lance or seemed to be stalking him. One of the prime suspects was Janine, his ex-wife. She had a $1 million life insurance policy on Lance and was the sole beneficiary. However, she appeared to have no strong financial motive. Despite the substantial payout, Lance had continued to financially support her and their son, paying thousands of dollars monthly until their son turned 18. This amount would exceed the lump sum of $1 million, so he was more valuable alive. Furthermore, Janine willingly cooperated with law enforcement and did not arouse suspicion. Kathy was with another man that night. Her alibi was confirmed, as was Talana's. Investigators continued to pursue other leads. There were plenty of them. A public funeral was held. Lance was buried in a closed casket because his face was too disfigured to be restored. Then, the most shocking information came to light. There was no money in the company's account. It turned out that Lance and his mother had been struggling for years to stay afloat. They immediately spent any income to pay off debts and employee salaries, concealing their financial struggles. After Lance's death, his relatives faced an almost unbearable debt burden of around $1 million. To pay off at least some of the debt, including unpaid salaries and taxes, they began selling off property, mostly below market value. This allowed them to significantly reduce the debt. Meanwhile, detectives continued their search for the killer. 18 months passed without any leads, and the investigation stalled. The situation changed when Sean Nelson arrived at the police station. He was in the process of divorcing Dion, and after a recent argument with his wife, he contacted the police. During that argument, Dion allegedly threatened him, saying in a fit of anger that she would kill him just as she had done with Lance Herndon. Sean further claimed that Dion admitted to being in Lance Herndon's house on the night of the murder. At the time, divorce proceedings were already underway. When the name of Lance surfaced in court, Dion lied, stating they were just friends. However, investigators found her current testimony contradicted her initial testimony immediately following Lance's death. Furthermore, Dion will have a trial for attempting to break into Lance's house. Investigators began to wonder if Dion had killed Lance to prevent him from testifying against her. The police wanted to talk to Dion and went to her house. When no one answered the door, they asked her neighbors if they knew where she was. But they didn't. The investigators left the scene and returned to the station. Shortly after the police departed, Dion returned to the neighbor's house and inquired about the police visit. Dion claimed she was taking a shower when the police arrived. But the neighbor was skeptical. Observing that Dion's hair was dry and she was wearing makeup, Dion then got into her car and drove away. The neighbor contacted the police and reported Dion's departure. Police officers then returned to Dion's house to wait for her return. About 20 minutes later, Dion arrived home. She then became hysterical upon learning of Lance's death. However, the police found her reaction unconvincing. She was invited to the station for questioning, where she mentioned that Lance's laptop was with her. She explained that Lance himself had brought it to her home shortly before the murder. This claim contradicted the established timeline of events. Moreover, Lance's employees stated that he would never have taken his laptop out of the office, as he constantly needed it for work, and certainly not without its case, which was later found in Dion's storage room. On January 29, 1998, police arrested Dion Baugh and charged her with the murder of Lance Herndon. Released on $150,000 bail, prosecutors spent time building their case against her. Among the evidence presented when the case finally went to trial in 2001 was the fact that on the day Lance Herndon was found dead, Dion had purchased $3,000 worth of furniture with one of Lance's credit cards. She also had his expensive laptop, which his associates said he never left with him. Among the state's witnesses was Detective William E. Anastasio, who recalled what others had said about Dion, painting a picture of her as a promiscuous gold digger, a claim her defense team vehemently disputed. After 6 hours and 20 minutes of deliberation, a jury convicted Dion Baugh of first-degree murder for the murder of Lance Herndon and sentenced her to life in prison. However, 2 years later, the Georgia Supreme Court overturned the conviction, finding that Detective Anastasio's testimony had prejudiced the jury. Dion Baugh's second trial for the murder of Lance Herndon ended in a mistrial after the jury failed to reach a consensus. She was released on $500,000 bail, rather than risk a third trial, which could have resulted in a reinstatement of her life sentence. Dion pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter in November 2004. She agreed to serve 10 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation upon her release. Dion Baugh was released from prison in November 2011 at the age of 44. Her ex-husband and children still live in Jamaica. On the morning of November 6, 2012, people on their way to work found the body of a young woman on 18th Avenue in Quezon City. She was wearing a white top and blue leggings. She had no shoes or purse or identification with her. Her eyes were open in a fearful expression. Then, police officers arrived and secured the scene, and a medical examiner was called. It was clear that she had been murdered. She had been shot 5 times in the head and had bruises, scrapes, dark marks on her body, indicating severe trauma. Injuries to her pelvic area suggested she may have been abused. She had no personal belongings except for a McDonald's paper bag in her hand. Detectives also found a McDonald's receipt nearby. While law enforcement tried to identify the victim, neighbors began giving their accounts. Some reported hearing gunshots around 5 a.m. Others saw a dark SUV speeding away. One witness said someone in the SUV shot at a person already on the ground. 2 other witnesses recalled part of the SUV's license plate number, which became a key detail early in the investigation. Crime scene technicians delayed moving the body to protect evidence. Within hours, the area was crowded with police, onlookers, journalists, and people recording videos. On the 5th of November, Julie Ann Rodales, a 20-year-old model, left her family's home in Las Piñas. It wasn't immediately cause for concern because Julie often worked late or spent time with friends. That evening, she told her mother and younger brothers not to wait up for her. Julie was going to meet a close friend, Althea Altamirano, to try and repair their relationship after a recent argument. Althea had invited Julie to meet a potential modeling client, which Julie saw as a good opportunity. Julie dressed carefully in a white top and blue leggings, and put on makeup. Around 6 p.m., she left to meet Althea at the SM Mall of Asia in Pasay. It started as a normal evening. 2 friends watched a movie, chatted, and strolled around. Later, they took a taxi to the World Trade Center, where they were to meet a client there. Around 10:30 p.m., as they walked on Diosdado Macapagal Boulevard, a dark SUV stopped next to them. 2 men jumped out, seized Julie, and shoved her into the SUV very quickly. Althea, who was right beside Julie, was unable to stop them. Julie's purse and shoes were left on the sidewalk as the SUV sped away. Althea was panicked and stayed where she was, clutching Julie's things and sobbing. Police officers saw her distress and stopped to help. They took her to the police station. There, she gave a confused account, saying that Julie had been kidnapped by strangers she didn't recognize. She said the attack was sudden. She barely saw the vehicle, only that it was a big, black SUV. She emphasized that they hadn't tried to take her too. At around 12:40 a.m., after giving her statement, Althea texted her boyfriend asking him to come pick her up. He arrived with his father, and they took her home to Cavite. By the following day, she had stopped answering calls from law enforcement. Later, her relatives claimed that she was afraid for her safety. However, detectives noted several inconsistencies in Althea's story. She failed to mention the prearranged meeting with Julie or the purported professional introduction they were to have. Julie Ann Rodales was born on July 14, 1992, and raised in Las Piñas, a southern suburb of Metro Manila. Within a modest but close-knit household, she was one of 6 siblings. Her mother, Luz, supported the family by preparing and selling homemade meals. A father figure was absent from their lives. His whereabouts and identity remained unknown, and he played no role in their daily existence. Despite the financial hardships, Julie grew up surrounded by love and support. From a young age, she was focused and responsible. Her decision to study hotel and restaurant management at Arellano University, a private college, was deliberate and driven by her long-term goals. However, the high tuition costs forced her to put her education on hold several times. To help fund her studies, Julie began working part-time. Modeling wasn't a pursuit of fame for her. It was a practical solution to cover her expenses. Her entry into the industry came through a personal connection, which eventually led to commercial shoots and an appearance on the ABS-CBN network. Julie's modeling career began to gain traction. She was featured in photo shoots for well-known men's magazines, including FHM Philippines. Her appearance, work ethic, and professionalism helped her secure steady gigs. She carved a path forward in a highly competitive field, while balancing her studies and modeling career. A significant influence in Julie's modeling career was Althea Altamirano, a friend, 3 years her senior. Althea had also entered the modeling world and, by 2012, had gained a modest level of recognition. She was featured as a Girlfriend of the Month in the September issue of FHM that year. In her social circles, Althea was viewed as ambitious, energetic, and goal-oriented. However, behind the image of success were personal details she kept carefully hidden. She was a mother of two. She chose not to publicize this, knowing it could undermine her image as a young and unattached professional model. They had known each other for years, and their relationship appeared close from the outside. Julie trusted Hare deeply. However, things shifted as Julie began gaining more traction in the industry. As her popularity grew, so did the tension between them. In Althea's eyes, Julie had gone from a friend to a rival. At the same time, rumors began spreading among other models that Althea was raising two children. Althea suspected that Julie was the one who had shared that information, and she saw it as a betrayal. That moment marked a turning point in their relationship. What started as quiet jealousy gradually turned into resentment and, eventually, into conflict. Though the tension remained unspoken, it hung heavily between them. Althea's growing fear of losing her standing in the industry pushed her toward confiding in her boyfriend. Fernando Quiambao Jr. was 32 years old and owned a tattoo shop in Quezon City. He was known for his aggressive behavior. According to Althea, during one of their arguments, he once pointed a weapon at her. Although she felt threatened, she didn't leave the relationship. It was Fernando who came up with the idea to scare Julie, suggesting it would help her understand who she was dealing with. The plan was to stage a confrontation without letting things go too far. Althea didn't push back on the suggestion. She didn't have a concrete plan, nor did she seem to grasp how serious the situation could become. Althea chose the moment, shared Julie's location, led her to the designated spot, and stood by silently when the incident occurred. None of these actions were impulsive. Right after Julie was kidnapped, she was taken to a house on Leno Street in Salam Compound, Quezon City. Compound is a crowded residential area with mostly Muslim families. The house was being used as a temporary hiding place. Inside, several men associated with Fernando were openly present. The kidnapping was planned in advance, and each person had a specific job, according to court records. The first person to isolate Julie was a man named Efren Talib. He took her into a separate room. Soon after, others in the house heard her yelling and pleading for help. One of the men present, Waraji, later testified that he heard her cries, but chose not to intervene. That's when the aggression escalated physically. Witnesses stated that Efren was the initial aggressor and remained alone with her for an extended period. Evidence later confirmed that she was subjected to both physical assault and an act of aggressive harassment. Later that night, a man named Aldos, described by others as dangerous and unpredictable, arrived at the house. He was not part of the original plan, and his presence was unwanted. Jamer, Aldos, and others were already there. Aldos, armed with a .45 caliber handgun, quickly took control. He ignored objections and announced he would assault Julie before she was taken care of. No one present intervened. Aldos's arrival dramatically escalated the situation. Unlike the others, he didn't treat it as a scare tactic or staged intimidation. His actions made it clear that he never intended to let Julie leave the house alive. Aldos told Julie she was going home as she exited the house. Julie, relieved and optimistic, thanked him, not knowing he was lying. Meanwhile, the others were planning how to get rid of her body. Yamar, realizing the situation was worse than he expected, left. He later became a crucial witness in the investigation. While the remaining people proceeded with their plan, Fernando went to a McDonald's on United Nations Avenue in Manila at 2:03 a.m. He ordered 2 cheeseburger combo meals to take away. He returned to the house and gave one meal to Julie. Fernando learns that Aldos and Efren attacked Julie. She was in shock, almost unresponsive, and couldn't speak clearly. Fernando assessed the situation and then stated that Julie needs to be dealt with. The tension inside the house intensified when one of the men accidentally said Fernando's real name while inside the vehicle. Julie may have heard it. Fernando feared that if she survived and recognized him by voice, she could become a serious problem. Investigators later confirmed that Aldos fired the first shot at Julie, followed by Efren. The firearm had been brought in advance, part of a plan that had clearly gone much further than intended. While Julie was still being held captive in the house on Leno Street in Quezon City, in the early morning hours, around 5 a.m., Julie's body was placed into a Mitsubishi Montero and driven away from Leno Street. The vehicle made a brief stop at 121 18th Avenue in Quezon City. There, the door opened, and her body was pulled out and left in a roadside ditch. Julie's family was worried when she didn't come home. Julie had never disappeared before and always kept in touch. This time, she hadn't contacted anyone. Her family tried to reach Althea, but she didn't answer. They started searching for her. The next morning, a news report about a young woman's body found in a ditch led Julie's mother, Luz, and her brother to the morgue. The clothes on the body matched what Julie had been wearing. Luz confirmed that the victim was Julie. This was devastating for the family. At this point, the police began investigating the connections between Julie, Althea, and Fernando. The day after Julie's body was found, investigators from the Criminal Investigation and Detection Unit started examining crucial evidence. They began by analyzing a McDonald's receipt clutched in the victim's hand. Using the time printed on the receipt, the police asked for security camera footage from the McDonald's on United Nations Avenue. The video showed a clear image of a man of medium height with noticeable tattoos ordering takeout at around 2 a.m. His face was easily recognizable. Concurrently, authorities were verifying details about a vehicle seen fleeing the scene. Witnesses had reported a black SUV, believed to be a Mitsubishi Montero. 2 individuals even partially recalled the license plate number. From this information, investigators traced the vehicle to a woman named Rosalina. A background check revealed that her son, Fernando Quiambao Jr., regularly used the vehicle, placing him at the center of the investigation. He matched the McDonald's customer's photo at 2 a.m. On the 9th of November, police began watching the Quiambao family's house. They didn't see Fernando the next day, but around 6 p.m., they saw his father, Fernando Quiambao Sr., leave. He was driving a black Toyota Innova and heading northwest. Officers followed him without being noticed. About an hour later, Fernando Sr. stopped in Apalit, a small town in Pampanga province. He went inside a Bahay Kubo, a traditional Filipino house. Fernando's mother's Mitsubishi Montero was parked close by. Police then entered the property and found Fernando and Althea inside. They didn't resist arrest, and no weapons were found. A forensic team investigated the scene, and the suspects were taken to the station for questioning. Around midnight on the 11th of November, police entered the house that had been used to hold Julie. There were armed people inside, and a gunfight broke out. One suspect, Fahad Osman, also known as Bob, was killed. Then, Jamar Waraji and Jilan Pasawa were arrested, charged with illegally having guns, and brought in for more questioning. At first, all suspects denied being involved in the crime. But as the questioning continued and the pressure mounted, their stories started to change. Jamar admitted he was at the house where Julie was held and began to help the investigators. He said he agreed to help Fernando because he was loyal to him, explaining that Fernando often gave him and others alcohol and money. Jamar identified Efren Talib and Aldos as others involved. Jamar stated that Aldos acted on his own and made the situation worse than anyone anticipated. Althea, interviewed separately, gave her version of the events. She admitted to agreeing to lure Julie to the location, but claimed she had no idea that things would go as far as they did. She stated that she believed it was only meant to scare her. Fernando, for his part, remained silent during questioning and demanded that his arrest be ruled invalid, insisting there was no evidence directly linking him to the crime. The investigation eventually confirmed that 7 individuals were involved: Fernando Quiambao Jr., Althea Altamirano, Jaymar Waraji, Jilan Pasawa, Efren Talib, Aldos, Bob, who was fatally shot. It became clear that the events were not the result of a personal dispute or emotional outburst, but were part of a coordinated and premeditated plan that ended in a tragic loss of life. As details emerged, the case gained wide media attention, and the investigation moved into high gear. After Althea was arrested, she agreed to talk to detectives. However, she immediately became defensive. During questioning, she claimed her boyfriend, Fernando, had manipulated and pressured her. She said Fernando had threatened her in the past, so she felt forced to follow his plan. Althea claimed she went into shock after the abduction and didn't know what to do. This, she said, was why she initially lied to the police and hid what really happened. She insisted she didn't know where Julie was taken or what happened to her. Jaymar Waraji's account differed significantly from Althea. He gave investigators a detailed description of the plan's creation, identifying each person's role and explaining how the operation unfolded. Jaymar stated that Althea informed Fernando of Julie's location and created the cover story used to entice Julie to the meeting. He also claimed Althea knew the SUV, and the people in it were waiting. Investigators believed Althea's actions demonstrated her willing participation in the abduction. After the arrest of several suspects, Aldos and Efren disappeared. Police couldn't catch them, so they were declared fugitives, and a national alert was issued. Jaymar helped the police create images of them to show the public. However, Aldos and Efren remained free, avoiding capture not just in 2012, but for many years after. The case took a surprising turn when one of the detainees, Jilan Pasawa, was released on bail in January 2013. He had been charged with illegally possessing firearms, but investigators lacked solid proof connecting him to the deadly attack or any acts of violence. Shortly after his release, on June 15th, a violent event occurred at his Quezon City home. While his family was eating, an unidentified person entered the property and fatally shot him. Jilan's wife refused to cooperate with the investigation and signed a waiver preventing any further inquiry into the incident. Consequently, the perpetrator was never caught. Jilan's death was a setback for investigators because he could have been a witness in Julie's case. Although he claimed he wasn't involved in Julie's death, his part in planning her abduction remained unclear. Despite this, the case was officially closed because Julie's family declined to press charges. The public strongly criticized this decision, even though the attacker was known. The police couldn't act without the family's complaint due to existing laws. By the summer of 2013, almost everyone connected to the case was either arrested or had an arrest warrant out for them. Althea insisted she wasn't to blame for anything and denied knowing Aldos or Efren. However, witnesses, the order of events, and confirmed details all proved she was lying. By the end of the investigation, the authorities knew exactly who had made the important choices, who had participated in the crime, and who was still on the run. Nearly 12 years passed from the time of Julianne Rodelas's tragic death to the first sentencing in the case. For a long time, the investigation remained stalled. It wasn't until 2024 that a trial was finally scheduled for Fernando Quiambao Jr. and Althea Altamirano. The initial court date, set for the 12th of July, was rescheduled 3 times. Although the reasons for the delays weren't officially disclosed, the victim's family believed the repeated postponements only served the interests of the accused. The trial began in September and lasted several months. Court sessions examined witness statements, case files, surveillance footage, and text communications between the involved parties. Notably, the firearm used in the fatal incident was never recovered. 2 of the suspected perpetrators, Efren Talib and Aldos, remained fugitives. After the trial, the court found Fernando Quiambao Jr. guilty of kidnapping, being an accessory to a violent crime, and engaging in aggressive behavior. Fernando received a life sentence with a minimum of 22 to 40 years. He must also pay the victim's family 500,000 Philippine pesos as compensation. Althea Altamirano was found guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. The court determined that there wasn't enough evidence to prove she knew beforehand that the kidnapping would involve fatal harm or aggression. Prosecutors couldn't directly prove she was at the crime scene after the kidnapping or that she had contact with Aldo's or Efren. Therefore, she was only convicted of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Althea had already been detained for more than 12 years. The court decided that this time served satisfied her sentence and ordered her immediate release. She was also fined 100,000 pesos. This decision provoked a strong emotional reaction from the Rodelas family. Luz, Julie's mother, along with several of her siblings, attended the sentencing hearing. Alvin, one of the brothers, publicly stated that forgiveness was impossible. The family appealed to the Supreme Court, requesting a re-evaluation of Althea's actions. In their view, her role in the events was not secondary, but pivotal. She initiated the conflict, involved Fernando, and had a personal motive driving him. Aside from the legal aspects, the case brought up difficult ethical issues. The prosecution proposed two possibilities: professional jealousy and personal resentment, fueled by a desire for revenge. The first idea was that in the cutthroat world of modeling, leaking personal information could seriously harm someone's career, where image is everything. The second idea was that Julie's greater success, landing more important jobs and becoming more popular, upset their relationship. Althea lost control and began to see Julie as a competitor instead of a friend. This change and the resulting loss of status may have been very humiliating for Althea. The key unresolved issue is whether Althea should have anticipated the outcome. Legally, the answer was no, but the facts suggest otherwise. Althea was aware of the nature of the people involved and Fernando's history of aggression. She initiated the chain of events and then relinquished control to individuals known to use violence. The court's failure to acknowledge Althea's role in these events left the Rodelas family feeling that justice had not been served. Two key individuals involved in carrying out the crime remain at large. The Rodelas family continues to push for a full review of the case. Julie's mother declared that she would keep fighting for justice and called Althea's release an insult to her daughter's memory. On June 19, 2021, in Italy's Brescia province, the highly anticipated summer car race, Mille Miglia, began. Cars started their journey on June 17, crossing half the country to reach Rome. As the participants made their way through Salò, tens of thousands of tourists lined the coast, enjoying the picturesque views of Lake Garda. With boats anchored along the shore, the race was set to continue the next day. And in the evening, people relaxed and celebrated, enjoying the city's nightlife. As dawn broke, the festive atmosphere suddenly turned tense. Journalists had gathered to cover the race when they noticed a boat drifting near Partes on Lake Garda. Upon closer inspection, they realized the vessel was severely damaged, as if it had hit rocks. Yet it remained afloat. When the boat was washed ashore, a dead man was found inside, curled in a fetal position and wearing a blue shirt, with dried blood everywhere. The scene resembled a horror movie. Along with his belongings, a woman's handbag was discovered on the boat, raising suspicions that he might not have been alone. Around the same time, a man named Enzo Garzarella visited the police station in Salò to report his son, Umberto Garzarella, missing. Umberto had left home the night before to watch the race and take a boat ride with his girlfriend. Although Umberto often went on such trips, they were usually brief, and he avoided sailing at night because of safety concerns. When Enzo noticed his son was missing for an unusually long time, he attempted to call him multiple times, growing increasingly worried when his son didn't answer. The Carabinieri were already aware of the found body in a wrecked boat on Lake Garda and brought Enzo to the scene for identification. Upon seeing his son Umberto's feet protruding from under a white sheet on the beach, Enzo immediately recognized him and fell to his knees, crying. Umberto, 37 at the time of his death, was well known in Salò as the owner of a company established by his father in 1996. specializing in servicing water heating boilers. He was a kind, tall and energetic man who loved sailing. Tragically, this was not the only distressing news that morning. Just a few kilometers away, another family was anxiously awaiting the return of their daughter, Greta Nedrotti, a 25 years old economics student. She had also failed to come home after an evening walk on June 19, 2021. The last contact her parents had with her was that night, and from then on, her phone went unanswered. They tried not to worry, believing that she was celebrating the races and enjoying time with her boyfriend. Her family became even more alarmed when they woke up early in the morning and still saw no sign of Greta. However, their concern grew when they woke up early in the morning and still had not seen any sign of her. The situation grew more urgent when the Carabinieri from Salo contacted Greta's family, informing her father that they had found a bag containing her ID card. They did not mention that it had been discovered on a severely damaged boat. While it was already known that Greta had been on the broken boat, her exact fate remained unclear, leading to a decision not to cause further alarm for her parents. Nonetheless, this lack of transparency did little to alleviate their concerns, and the entire family was in a state of panic, actively searching for Greta. Initially, the investigation suggested that some sort of collision had occurred, resulting in Greta ending up in the water. After checking all local medical facilities and confirming that Greta had not been admitted, authorities speculated that she might still be in the lake or that she had already drowned. A search and rescue operation was launched on the water, and diving teams spent about 12 hours searching the lake. Eventually, Greta's body was discovered at the bottom. The condition of her body indicated a severe accident, as her legs were partially amputated, and she had numerous cuts and other injuries throughout. Upon hearing this devastating news, Greta's parents were heartbroken. They had held on to hope, refusing to believe that Greta would never come home. Just the day before, she had been trying on beautiful dresses in her room for an evening event. She had recently started dating a popular boy named Umberto Garzarella. Greta was a vibrant and friendly young woman, dedicated not just to her family but also to her education and career. In a statement to journalists, her father recalled seeing her last as she sat on the living room couch, reading before hurriedly packing to leave. She had informed them she would return late that evening, but she never did. The loss of their only daughter was a profound shock for the family. When the news of Umberto and Greta's tragic deaths on the lake broke, local newspapers and news channels flooded the area. Continuous live broadcasts from the scene attracted interviews with locals who knew Umberto and were eager to share what a wonderful person he was. Greta's parents also spoke, highlighting their daughter's aspirations for a master's degree while working at an accounting firm. Those who knew her described her as intelligent and goal-oriented. Even Greta's ex-husband, with whom she had remained on friendly terms, spoke to the media. This revealed that Greta and Umberto were well-liked individuals, yet it did not clarify the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Questions arose about what had occurred on the lake, and even law enforcement was puzzled. Initial theories suggested that Umberto might have consumed too much alcohol or fallen asleep at the helm, leading to the collision. However, Umberto was an experienced sailor and handled boats well, making this scenario seem unlikely. A blood alcohol test showed he had only consumed about 1 glass of wine that evening, which would not significantly impair his judgment. Additionally, the damage to the boat above the waterline was unusual, with the side of the vessel appearing sliced significantly along the hull. The police contacted the lake's Coast Guard, and experts concluded that the boat had likely collided with another vessel traveling at high speed. The force of impact kept Umberto's boat from sinking, and pieces of a different colored hull were found in the breach. These fragments likely belonged to another vessel involved in the incident. During witness interviews from the night of the 19th of June, police spoke with a man who provided the first clue that could help solve the case. He reported hearing a loud bang late at night and then saw a large object moving away from the lake's shore. Due to the darkness and distance, he did not realize a collision had occurred. But after the crash, one of the boats appeared to drift away. Noticing along, jagged hole on the starboard side of a boat. Police decided to follow up on a report made to the lake's Coast Guard the previous day. However, there had been no calls about collisions or accidents on the water. That same morning, the Coast Guard discovered a damaged motorboat, the Riva Super Aquarema, which had an estimated value of around 800,000 euros. At that moment, no one linked this boat to the deaths of Umberto and Greta. The Riva was moored at a small factory in Salo. Far from the race location, it was heavily damaged, particularly at the front, and wooden chips of a different color were found in its hull, likely from the second boat involved in the accident. A check confirmed that these parts matched components missing from Umberto's boat. The next step was to determine the owner of the damaged vessel. It turned out that the owner was Christian Theismann, a 50-year-old German tourist, who was vacationing at Lake Garda with his friend, 52 years old, Patrick Casson, also from Germany. Both men were high-ranking executives at major international companies who had come to Salau to enjoy the lake, watch the race, and relax. They were easily located at a hotel near the pier where the wrecked boat was found. They appeared confused when they were taken in for questioning. They seemed unaware of the situation and were clearly intoxicated, smelling strongly of alcohol. Language barriers complicated communication since they did not speak Italian, and the Carabinieri did not speak German. Despite the difficulties, detectives have managed to piece together the events that occurred that evening. Patrick and Christian recounted that they spent most of the day on their boat. They walked along the lake shore, observing the race, and stopped at various docks in Brescia to buy drinks and snacks. Later in the evening, they dined at a restaurant, before boarding their boat again at 11:00 p.m. They believed that around 24 minutes later, they collided with Umberto's boat. However, their memories of the incident were vague, claiming they crashed into a large log without hearing any screams or seeing anyone, and then quickly returned to the pier at the hotel. Law enforcement agencies discovered surveillance cameras in the area and reviewed the footage, which captured the moments after a collision. Patrick and Christian did not stop to help Umberto and Greta. Instead, they sped towards the coast and docked near their hotel at 11:31 p.m. When Christian and Patrick got off their boat, CCTV footage showed them struggling to maintain their balance, clearly indicating they were very drunk. Patrick stumbled and fell onto the dock. The video clip of Patrick and Christian, who are suspected of wrongdoing, quickly went viral after it was leaked to the media. The release of the recording led to a public outcry within days. Local residents were furious with the behavior of the German tourists. Patrick and Christian, especially after learning that Christian had initially refused to take an alcohol test. Many believed he should have been tested since it was evident from the footage that he was barely able to stand. Eventually, Christian was convinced to take the test, which revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.29 part per million, even 14 hours after his detention. This indicated that he had been extremely impaired at the time of the accident and likely unable to comprehend the situation. It is worth noting that, when speaking with the Carabinieri, Patrick and Christian were irritable, insisting they had done nothing wrong and that they were being held unlawfully. They believed they had hit a log, which is why they didn't stop and return to shore before their boat sank. Unfortunately, the CCTV footage did not capture the speed of the men's boat. This sparked further discussions. While there were disagreements about the exact speed, many believed the boat was traveling faster than 30 kilometers per hour. This was supported not only by the damage to Umberto's boat but also by Greta's injuries. Coast Guard experts stated that Christian's boat was moving at a speed of at least 40 kilometers per hour, significantly exceeding the allowed speed limit in the dark. Still unclear about the situation, Patrick and Christian hired lawyers. It is worth noting that, until that moment, they had not fully understood that their actions had resulted in the deaths of Umberto and Greta, largely due to a language barrier. Once they understood the seriousness of the incident, they became noticeably calmer. Preliminary hearings took place, after which Patrick and Christian were sent back to their home city of München. They were instructed to stay there until the trial commenced. This decision shocked the families of Umberto and Greta, As the two murderers were allowed to return home after signing written agreements not to leave, they carried on with their normal lives, seemingly unaffected. While waiting for the judge to set a trial date, from the outset, both Patrick and Christian had been listed as suspects for manslaughter and for failing to assist victims Umberto and Greta. This charge carried a relatively light sentence, with potential penalties of less than 10 years for the two lives they took. The trial was expected to be challenging, primarily because it was difficult to determine which man was operating the boat during the collision. Both Patrick and Christian claimed to have no recollection of the event. Detectives aimed to clarify this and other elements of the incident by gathering more evidence prior to the trial. Relying heavily on camera footage, the public reacted negatively to the decision to permit Patrick and Christian to return home, viewing it as an attempt to evade punishment and responsibility. Umberto's family and Greta's family felt that this leniency was facilitated by Patrick and Christian's wealth and connections, and they believed the suspects prioritized their freedom and reputations over the victims' lives. Moreover, the families were understandably worried that the suspects could escape justice. 2 weeks after the tragedy, Christian and Patrick sent letters of apology to Greta's parents and Umberto's parents. However, the families rejected these letters, which were printed rather than handwritten and bore no signatures. They viewed this gesture as insincere. This response was particularly upsetting given the horrific circumstances surrounding Umberto and Greta's deaths. Umberto died instantly from the force of the impact, while Greta suffered severe injuries, including multiple fractures from being struck. Initially, it was believed that Greta had drowned after being thrown from the boat due to the collision. However, the actual circumstances were even more tragic. The families mourned the loss of their children, burying them in their hometowns just days apart. In remembrance, they released hundreds of white balloons into the sky. Meanwhile, detectives continued their investigation, searching for information to determine who was driving the boat at the time of the accident. They gathered CCTV footage and interviewed witnesses. Eventually, they managed to obtain footage from a villa overlooking the lake in Port Sea that captured the collision. While the recording was grainy, it revealed important details. Clearly, the boat involved belonged to Patrick and Christian, and it collided with Umberto and Greta's boat. This footage clarified the circumstances of Greta's death, showing that she had not been thrown from the boat. She remained inside during the impact. After the collision, Patrick and Christian's boat was seen moving away from the damaged vessel. Moments later, something small fell into the water, resembling Greta's dress, and bloodstains were found on the boat's hull, initially thought to belong to Umberto. It seems that Greta was in a state of panic. She crawled over the side of the boat and jumped into the water, trying to swim to shore to save herself. However, due to the extent of her injuries, her legs were cut up. She struggled to swim and ultimately drowned. By September 2021, the prosecutor's office determined that Patrick was the one driving the boat, which belonged to his friend Christian. This meant Christian also held some responsibility for letting an untrained and intoxicated person operate his property. On July 5, Patrick went to the city prosecutor's office to surrender voluntarily. He wanted to avoid arousing too much attention and being taken into custody from his home in handcuffs. As he was concerned about the potential impact on his family, he confirmed that he was driving the boat, which resulted in a list of charges against him: 2 counts of manslaughter, failing to assist in a rescue, and operating a vessel while drunk, all of which contributed to the lake accident. Investigators had thoroughly reconstructed the events of that evening, revealing a picture of reckless behavior and excessive alcohol use. After the collision involving Umberto and Greta, the boat was tied to the shore, and Patrick and Christian did not return to their hotel. Instead, they went to another bar. They sustained only minor injuries, and when they were picked up the next morning, no serious injuries were reported. They failed to contact emergency services, even anonymously. Witnesses noted that 2 very intoxicated men who spoke German entered the bar. Struggling to form coherent sentences, one man hit his head on a wooden pillar and felt nauseous but refused assistance. By the end of September, the court announced that hearings would begin in November, during which time Patrick was held in custody. Meanwhile, the families of Umberto and Greta had received financial compensation from the insurance companies of Patrick and Christian. Prior to that, they sought justice for their loved ones, attending the hearings in support of their children. When Patrick finally took the stand, he personally apologized to the families of Umberto and Greta for the first time since the incident, asserting that they were unaware of the accident due to their drunkenness. However, this explanation sounded insincere. As of December 19, the hearings were still ongoing. For Umberto's parents, this date was particularly difficult because it marked what would have been their son's 38th birthday. Umberto's father approached Christian, urging him to take action to honor both Umberto and Greta. The next day, Christian unexpectedly visited Umberto's gravesite, where he apologized once again and shared his plans for a charity project aimed at supporting families affected by accidents. Patrick remained involved in the hearings, with his lawyer working to reduce his culpability. Initially, the lawyer disputed Patrick's level of intoxication, arguing that it was unprovable how much he had drunk before getting on the boat. An independent expert was hired to challenge the Coast Guard's conclusion that the boat was traveling over 40 kilometers per hour, claiming instead that it was going no faster than 10 kilometers per hour. Then events took a bizarre turn. The defense attempted to shift blame onto Umberto for not taking the necessary actions to avoid the boat. The lawyer accused Umberto of being negligent and violating maritime regulations. He also suggested that Greta may have failed to comply with safety regulations, as she was allegedly standing in the position where the collision occurred. Upon hearing this absurd defense, Umberto's father left the courtroom in frustration. Christian's lawyer even claimed that Christian was asleep while the boat was moving, implying he could not control Patrick's actions. In March 2022, a lengthy trial was concluding. Prosecutors sought a 5-year prison sentence for Patrick Casson and 5 years for his friend Christian Theismann. However, the court only accepted part of these claims. Patrick, who had been driving the boat, was sentenced to 5 years, and Christian received a sentence of 2 years and 6 months. The court's decision focused solely on the manslaughter charge and did not consider their failure to assist the victims, Umberto and Greta. This shows that their irresponsibility was overlooked, as their testimony that they thought they had hit a large log was accepted without any doubt. By May, the appellate court upheld the sentences, which then took effect. Families of Umberto and Greta, along with concerned citizens, expressed their outrage at the court's leniency, especially regarding who was actually steering the boat. Surveillance footage revealed that when the two men departed from shore, it was Christian, the boat owner, who was in control, not Patrick. Friends of Patrick and Christian stated that the owner, Christian, rarely allowed anyone else to steer the boat. This raised important questions about who was at the helm and whether Patrick and Christian had switched places. Umberto and Greta's families attempted to challenge this point but were unsuccessful. The only course of action left for them was to advocate for a change in the law to ensure stricter penalties for such incidents. Consequently, a petition was launched to equate water-related accidents with those occurring on roads. On September 20, 2023, the Chamber of Deputies approved the bill after gathering 100,000 signatures. It passed with 288 votes in favor and only 1 against. This amendment to the criminal code is informally named after Umberto and Greta. Thanks to this initiative, penalties for causing death in a water accident can now range from 2 to 18 years in prison, while penalties for causing bodily harm can go up to 7 years. Kelly was born on August 1, 1982, in Elmira, New York. She was the youngest of Elizabeth Stage and Howard Stage's 3 children. Her father, Howard, was well regarded in the community, having been the chief of the West Elmira Volunteer Fire Department for many years. Kelly's older sister, Kim Bourgeois, who was 10 years older, it was very protective of her. Kim felt like a second mother to Kelly, describing her as very brave, sassy. Kelly enjoyed dancing and was very beautiful. She had the potential to be a model. That was her aspiration. Kelly had a vibrant personality and big ambitions. This led her to leave her teaching job and move from her hometown to Las Vegas. There, she became a cocktail waitress. She loved her new life, enjoying the glamour and wearing extravagant costumes. Kim recalled how much Kelly enjoyed the fast-paced and exciting atmosphere of Las Vegas, even wearing a 30-pound feather headdress to work. Then, Kelly returned to Elmira because she was drawn to Thomas Clayton, a well-known hockey player for the Elmira Jackals. Clayton had a reputation both for his performance in the semi-professional league and his behavior outside of it. Kim later said that people admired him because he was attractive, a troublemaker, which many found captivating. Thomas was from Binghamton, New York, and studied at Niagara University, where he played ice hockey. He then joined the Elmira Jackals and played forward for 4 seasons, from 1998 to 2002. During this time, he became a popular figure in the small town due to his charm and athletic ability. However, his reputation was also affected by his reckless behavior and numerous relationships with different women. Kelly and Thomas were instantly attracted to each other when they met at a hockey game while she was visiting home for Christmas. Even though Thomas was known for being reckless and having a bad reputation, Kelly was captivated by his charm and popularity. Their connection was so strong that Kelly quickly decided to give up her thrilling life in Las Vegas and move to New York to begin a new chapter with Thomas. They married within a year of meeting. Kelly changed her last name to Clayton, her husband's last name. They settled in Canton, New York, to start their life together. Everyone thought they were deeply in love and had found something special. After an injury ended Thomas's hockey-playing days, he shifted his career focus and became the owner of a water and fire damage restoration franchise called Paul Davis Emergency Services of the Southern Tier. He later became a project manager at Serve Pro, a similar franchise owned by his close friend Brian Lang. Thomas seemed dedicated to building a successful business and providing for his growing family. Kelly Clayton embraced her new role as a wife and mother while also working as a waitress at the Woodhouse Stadium Grill in Corning. Their first child, Charlie Emma, was born in 2008, followed by their son, Cullen, a few years later. To outsiders, the Clayton family appeared perfect. Kelly balanced caring for their 2 children with her job, and Thomas ran his business successfully. They were busy, but seemed like a happy family of 4. However, their marriage was starting to show signs of trouble. Thomas had become a gambler and openly carried a lot of cash. The couple kept cash in 2 safes at home, and Thomas frequently took large sums to casinos for high-stakes poker. His gambling was becoming a serious problem. Once, he even lent his car to a friend's sister, while unaware that $22,000 was in the trunk. As Thomas and Kelly's marriage went on, Thomas's unhappiness and restlessness became obvious to their friends and family. Kelly was dedicated to their family and marriage, but Thomas seemed emotionally detached. He started having affairs. During these affairs, Thomas often complained to the other women about Kelly, calling her lazy and saying he wanted to leave her. However, he always told them he couldn't divorce her because she would take everything. This suggests that Thomas wanted to end the marriage but didn't want to pay for a divorce. About a year before Kelly's death, a major warning sign appeared. Thomas doubled her life insurance policy from $500,000 to $1 million. This large increase, along with his affairs and complaints, suggested he was planning something terrible. Thomas mistreated his employees. He would often keep them in debt to him, using tactics such as giving them loans, extra work. Michael Beard was one such employee. Thomas seemed to use this debt to control his employees, making them dependent on him. Michael had worked for Thomas at Thomas's businesses and at Serve Pro, a company owned by Thomas's friend, Brian Lang. Because of this, Michael knew the Clayton family's home well, including its layout. He had worked there many times and had been trusted to enter their private areas. However, Michael was fired from Serve Pro just 12 days before Kelly Clayton's murder. He was fired because of complaints about drinking, banned substance use, and stealing from clients' homes. This left him in financial difficulty. He couldn't pay rent to Thomas for his apartment, and he didn't have a car or a driver's license, making his situation even worse. After firing Michael, Thomas seems to help him by suggesting job opportunities and buying him a bicycle. During the next 12 days, they spoke on the phone often, a detail that became important later in the trial, thanks to cell phone records. Although it looked like Thomas was simply helping a former employee who was struggling, the prosecution argued that he was actually exploiting Michael's financial hardship to pressure him into committing murder. On September 28, 2015, Thomas and Luc Tetrol, an employee, switched trucks that day to make unloading easier. However, a security camera footage from a storage unit near the company revealed the truck swap was carefully planned. That Monday evening, Thomas drove to Greg Miller's house in Corning for their regular poker night. Arriving around 8:00 p.m., he used a company truck instead of his own car. Greg and his wife, Linda, hosted the weekly game where friends and neighbors played low-stakes poker until late. On the 28th of September, 2015, Thomas seemed fine during the game. But before 11:00 p.m., he asked Linda Miller to use her phone. This simple request would later prove to be important evidence. Around 10:50 p.m., Thomas called Michael from Linda's phone. This call initiated the murder plot. At the time, Michael was at home, arguing with his partner. After the call, around 11:30 p.m., Michael left home on his bicycle. He rode to Serve Pro, where he retrieved the maroon truck Thomas had left for him. Next, Michael picked up Mark Blanford. Blanford later stated he didn't know about the murder plot and thought he was just watching out for a break-in. The maroon truck arrived back at the company parking lot at 12:55 a.m. On September 29, 2015, surveillance footage showed someone leaving the parking lot on a bicycle a few minutes later, presumably Michael returning home. Back at the Clayton home, Kelly was with her 2 young children. She had no idea about the terrible events that were about to happen. Around midnight, Michael used a key Thomas had given him to enter the house through the garage. He was wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask. Charlie later said the mask looked like one her father wore when hunting. Kelly was asleep in her bedroom when Michael broke into her house and went upstairs. He attacked her in the master bedroom, hitting her twice with the handle of a fiberglass maul. The attack woke Kelly, but she fought back and tried to escape. She ran from the bedroom towards her daughter's room down the hall. While trying to get away, Kelly fell down the stairs, hitting the wall at the bottom. She then ran through the dining room into the kitchen, but Michael caught her and continued hitting her with the maul handle. He brutally beat her head and face until she died from her injuries. On September 29, 2015, sometime after 12:30 m-, Thomas came home from a poker game and found his wife, Kelly, dead in the kitchen. He said she was lying in a pool of blood. The scene suggested a violent struggle that started in the bedroom, continued down the hallway and stairs, and ended in the kitchen, where Kelly died. Thomas called 911, appearing shocked and upset while reporting his wife's death. However, investigators quickly became suspicious. They felt his behavior and description of the scene seemed insincere. Police officers arriving at the scene found a very bloody crime scene. According to Deputy Dean Swan, Deputy Swan's body camera recorded the shocking aftermath, which he described as almost unbelievable. Evidence showed that Kelly had been beaten to death with great force, resulting in severe head and facial injuries. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing from the house. This eliminated robbery as a motive, suggesting the attack was personal and intended only to kill Kelly. Within hours of the murder, Kelly's family members arrived at the scene. Her sister, Kim Bourgeois, and her mother, Elizabeth, were at the house within an hour of the police's arrival. Kim later described the horror of that moment. Her mother and her were wailing. She was throwing up on the side of the road. She can't even explain to you that feeling. The most devastating part of this crime was that Kelly's 7-year-old daughter, Charlie, saw much of it. When police questioned her, Charlie, being so young, first said the person who broke in was a robber. However, her detailed story was very important in solving the case. Charlie told investigators that a man came in and hit her mommy with something like a pipe. She thought her mommy was dead when she saw her on the ground. Charlie also remembered that during the attack, her mother told her to run away, showing that Kelly was trying to protect her daughter even as she was dying. Sheriff Jim Allard felt a chill when Charlie, asked how she knew the intruder was male, replied, "Because his eyes looked just like Daddy's." This statement made Thomas a suspect in his wife's murder, despite his apparent alibi. In a later interview at the Chemung County Child Advocacy Center, Charlie gave more details about the intruder. She described him as wearing dark jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a mask similar to one her father wore hunting. When asked to clarify how the intruder resembled her father, Charlie specified his mask and jeans, confirming she had seen her father wear similar items. As investigators began to piece together what had happened, they immediately focused on Thomas as a potential suspect. While his alibi appeared solid, he had been at the poker game with multiple witnesses who could corroborate his presence. Something about the situation didn't add up. The investigation changed significantly when Linda Miller, Greg's wife who was at the poker game, informed the police that Thomas had asked to use her cell phone about 90 minutes before Kelly's body was found. This detail became important when investigators learned that Thomas had called Michael Beard using Linda's phone. Phone records showed that Thomas and Michael had been in frequent contact in the days before the murder. This was strange because Michael no longer worked for Thomas. This increased communication, along with Michael's recent firing and money problems, pointed to a possible murder-for-hire scheme. When police questioned Michael Beard, he initially confessed to killing Kelly Clayton. He stated that Thomas hired him to murder Kelly and burn down the house to collect insurance money. Michael described the murder plot discussions. Starting in April 2015, Thomas allegedly offered him $10,000 for a job that could lead to jail time. Without specifying what it was, Michael joked about killing Thomas's wife for that amount, and Thomas smiled but didn't elaborate. The plan allegedly became firm after Michael was fired from ServPro on September 17, 2015. Michael said Thomas picked him up that day and asked how he would earn income and pay rent. Michael, who lived in Thomas's apartment, claimed Thomas offered him 5 months of free rent, plus the $10,000 to kill Kelly. However, in a stunning turn of events, Michael later recanted his confession before the trial. He changed his story completely, claiming that Thomas had only hired him to burn down the house for insurance money, and that when he arrived at the Clayton home, he found Kelly already dead. According to this new version of events, Michael panicked upon seeing the body and fled without setting the fire, which explained why the house was never burned. After confessing initially, Michael showed the police where he had discarded important evidence after the murder. This included the murder weapon, hidden in a wooded area, blood-stained clothes he wore during the attack, and keys to the Clayton home that Thomas had given him to enter the house. The bloody clothes were found in a swamp about 40 feet from an inn in Elmira. Thomas had previously asked about surveillance cameras at that same inn. DNA tests confirmed that the blood on the clothing was Michael's, providing undeniable proof that he was involved in the murder. Even though Michael later denied his involvement, investigators had strong physical evidence connecting him to the crime. Crucially, Michael's DNA was found on the fiberglass handle of the maul, which was the murder weapon used to kill Kelly. Meanwhile, the case against Thomas Clayton was built largely on circumstantial evidence, but it was overwhelming in its scope and detail. Surveillance footage from the storage facility next to ServPro showed the carefully orchestrated vehicle exchange that allowed Michael to use Thomas's truck to travel to and from the murder scene. GPS data from the company trucks provided a detailed timeline of movements on the night of the murder. The data showed Thomas driving a green ServPro truck that left the company at 6:10 p.m. and arrived at the Clayton home At 7:25 p.m., the truck left the Clayton home at 7:37 p.m. and arrived in Corning 14 minutes later for the poker game. More crucially, the GPS data picked up again on the 29th of September, 2015, when Thomas turned on the truck at 12:22 a.m. and showed the vehicle arriving back at the Clayton home at 12:35 a.m. The time when he allegedly discovered Kelly's body and called 911. The investigation showed that Thomas wanted Kelly dead for two main reasons: money and personal desires. He had secretly doubled her life insurance. Also, he was having affairs and wanted to end his marriage without losing money in a divorce. During the trial, 3 women testified that they had relationships with Thomas while he was married. One of these women was only 15 years old when the affair occurred. The prosecution argued that Thomas wanted to be free from his marriage and collect Kelly's life insurance. Therefore, he found it easier to hire someone to kill her than to get a divorce. His relationships with other women proved he was unhappy in his marriage, but didn't want to deal with the financial consequences of a divorce. Michael Beard and Thomas Clayton were tried separately for first-degree murder. Michael's trial occurred first. In late 2016, although he retracted his confession, the jury convicted him based on the strong physical evidence. Michael Beard was sentenced to life in prison without parole for first-degree murder in November 2016. He was sentenced to life in prison in February 2017. Beard is serving his sentence at Auburn State Prison. Clayton's trial began in early 2017 and lasted several weeks. In February 2017, after 6 weeks of proceedings and 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found Thomas Clayton guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced in April 2017 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, Clayton insisted on his innocence, stating, "He had absolutely nothing to do with the murder of Kelly." Clayton is incarcerated at Sing Sing State Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. Mark Blanford, 53, pleaded guilty to second-degree manslaughter. Blanford began serving his sentence in April 2017 and was released on parole in late August 2020 from the Cayuga Correctional Facility in Moravia. According to the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, the most tragic aspect of this case was its impact on Kelly's children. In a heartbreaking letter read at Thomas's sentencing, Charlie wrote, "I love my mom. I love my dad. But my dad is a coward because he made Michael Beard kill my mommy." Custody of the children was given to Kelly's sister, Kim Bourgeois, who has worked tirelessly to provide them with a loving home. The murder of Kelly Stage Clayton has left a deep wound in the quiet community of Caton, New York, which prides itself on its reputation as a small town. The death of Kelly, a devoted mother and vibrant woman, is not only a devastating blow to her family, but also a sobering reminder of the consequences of greed and betrayal. Thomas Clayton, driven by financial intrigue and personal grievance, hired Michael Beard to carry out the brutal crime, taking the life of the wife he had promised to love and protect. Charlie's innocent yet haunting testimony became the key to bringing the truth to light, proving that justice can be served even in the most heartbreaking circumstances. Although Thomas and Michael were sentenced to life in prison, nothing could ease the pain of Charlie and Cullen, who had lost their beloved mother. Thanks to the loving care of Kim Bourgeois, Kelly's children are now in a new home. But this story reminds us of the value of honesty, family unity, and the importance of facing conflict with honesty rather than violence. One morning in June in Occitania, France, Amandine Estrabaud, a high school assistant from the small town of Roquecourbe, left for work. That evening, neighbors didn't see her near her home. The next day, her phone stopped working, and her front door was unlocked. Something is fishy. From a young age, Amandine was involved in community events, including the local festival committee. She had a very close and friendly relationship with her mother. She was also close to her brother, Remy. People in Roquecourbe affectionately called Amandine and Remy the village children. After breaking up with her partner, Amandine moved back to her hometown. She was independent and actively involved in life. Even though she had previously lived with her partner near the Castries train station, Amandine hoped to study speech-language pathology and intended to buy a car. There was no indication that she had disappeared voluntarily or was experiencing a serious emotional breakdown. On Tuesday, June 18, 2013, Amandine went to work at the lycée. It was a typical day. She spent the morning helping staff, and everything seemed fine. Around 1:10 p.m., she finished her work and left. Usually, someone drove her home because she didn't have a car. However, that day, no one could give her a ride. Having no other option, she started walking home alone. The walk was approximately 8 miles long and would take her nearly 3 hours to complete. Around 2:15 p.m., Amandine was reportedly seen in the salvage area near a bus stop just a few miles from her home. This was the last confirmed public sighting of her. What happened afterward is still unclear, but investigators have pieced together a possible sequence of events based on second-hand accounts. Although there was no surveillance footage or other hard evidence, a neighbor named Karine helped piece together a key part of the timeline. Karine lived nearby and had a clear view of Amandine's front door from her home. Around 4:00 p.m., she noticed a white Renault traffic van parked outside, a vehicle she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. It didn't belong to any locals and stood out as unfamiliar. Amandine got out of the van first. She appeared calm, was wearing normal clothes, and didn't seem upset. Karine saw her holding a bag on her lap and looking for her keys. Amandine unlocked the door and went inside. Soon after, a man got out of the van. Karine couldn't see his face clearly because she only saw him from behind and he was far away. However, she remembered he was about 170 centimeters tall and had a sturdy build. He was wearing gray work pants with large pockets and orange reflective stripes, like those worn by construction, road, or utility workers. Although Karine couldn't see his face, his behavior didn't seem suspicious. He walked calmly and wasn't aggressive. Karine said there was no argument or tension between him and Amandine. They seemed to interact in a normal. She didn't hear any yelling or signs of a fight. Investigators recorded Karine's statement, and it became important to the case. On June 19, Amandine's mother, Monique, started to worry. They usually met up, and had planned to do so the day before. They were very close and always kept in contact. Monique called several times throughout the day and evening, but Amandine didn't answer. Amandine always returned calls quickly if she missed them, but this time Monique heard nothing. Monique initially wasn't worried, assuming Amandine was occupied. However, when she still hadn't received any contact by the following morning, Monique decided to drive to Amandine's home. When she arrived, she found the front door unlocked. This immediately alarmed her. Amandine was always cautious, especially living in a secluded area. Inside, everything looked as if Amandine had just stepped out for a moment. A jacket hung neatly on a chair. Her everyday bag was in its usual place. Her phone was left out and unattended. The home was quiet. Monique called out, but no one responded. There were no signs of urgent errands or a quick departure. A visual inspection of the home's interior revealed no signs of disorder. Everything was in its place, no forced entry, no displaced furniture, no items thrown around. Monique felt strongly that something was wrong. Amandine was usually very organized and predictable. Especially recently, she always kept her phone with her, told someone where she was going, and locked her door. Because Amandine wasn't acting like herself, Monique decided to call the police. She contacted the local police station in Roca-Courbe. Officers came to the house and looked around. They saw the same things Monique did. There was no sign of a fight. The door hadn't been forced open, and it didn't look like anyone had broken in. It seemed like Amandine had left on her own without being forced. However, after the officers went outside, they found something disturbing. Behind the house, accessible through a sliding glass door, was a garden. While the yard was overgrown, a specific patch of grass caught their attention. It was a rectangular area, about 5 by 5 feet. where the grass was noticeably flattened, the ground was even, and the plants were pressed down, suggesting something or someone had been there for a long time or had exerted force on the area. This suggests that a struggle may have taken place. Near this location, police found some of Amandine's belongings, including a pair of light shoes, identified by Monique as the ones Amandine wore the previous day, and 2 earrings. The earrings were damaged at the clasps, suggesting they may have been pulled off forcefully, perhaps during a struggle. This was the first physical evidence suggesting that something unusual happened to Amandine. Even though the search that day didn't turn up anything new, the investigators had enough information to consider Amandine's case a suspicious disappearance. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. The case quickly moved into its active phase. The first step was to review any available surveillance footage. Though cameras were few and far between in the area, authorities also canvassed potential routes Amandine could have taken on the 18th of June, prioritizing anyone who might have seen her that day. The speedy efforts, no new sightings surfaced beyond what had already been documented. Soon, missing person bulletins were issued. Amandine was described as approximately 165 meters tall with long dark hair. On the day she vanished, she was wearing a brown skirt that fell above the knee, a light tan jacket, and a dark blouse. Flyers were posted around the region at bus stops, on bulletin boards, and in local shops. Notices also ran in regional newspapers and on local radio stations. They started an official investigation, interviewing neighbors and trying to piece together her last known activities. At the same time, many people were searching the area between Cantigolan and Salvage, near Amandine's house. Volunteers and officials looked carefully through forests, fields, and along the Agout River. Even though they searched a large area, they didn't find Amandine or anything that belonged to her. Each passing day made it less likely that Amandine had left on her own. Her bank account remained untouched, and there were no phone calls or messages to suggest a voluntary disappearance. Everything pointed to something far more troubling, most likely a crime. In the initial weeks of the investigation, the primary theory quickly became that she was the victim of a violent crime committed by someone else. The investigation then focused a company in Rocacourbe because they owned a utility van matching the description of one seen near Amandine's residence. Furthermore, the uniforms their employees wore were similar to what the man seen entering Amandine's house was wearing. Garrick Jahano, 25, mason at this company, was originally from the area and knew many people, including Amandine's brother, Ray. Before working at the construction firm, Garrick cut granite. His name came up in the case in April 2014 when his mother, Irma, contacted the authorities. She was worried about her son's behavior. Irma said Garrick kept making strange statements, such as, "I'm not a criminal," and, if they find blood in the van, it's from fish. He mentioned strange smells he encountered while fishing or mushroom hunting and claimed he could smell death. He had become increasingly paranoid, believing people were watching and hunting him. He once said he saw someone in the woods with a shovel, but didn't report it. It was uncertain if these were intrusive thoughts, delusions, or signs of emotional distress. Following his mother's statement, Garrick was questioned for the first time. He was detained for 48 hours in June 2014, but denied any involvement in Amandine's disappearance. Company records initially supported his alibi, showing he was assigned to a construction site in Castres on the 18th of June. His supervisor and colleagues confirmed his presence. However, further investigation revealed inconsistencies. A supervisor admitted that after a concrete delivery to a construction site near Rocacourbe, a 6-minute drive from Amandine's home, he had approximately 90 minutes unaccounted for. None of Garrick's colleagues could confirm his location during that time. It was possible he used the company van to travel near Amandine's residence. Therefore, his whereabouts during a crucial period remained unknown. The neighbor who last saw Amandine before she disappeared was asked if she recognized Garrick. She couldn't say for sure if he was the man she saw. In Rocacourbe, she knew many people by sight, including Garrick, She did mention that Garrick's usual work pants looked like the ones the man was wearing that day. However, because she only saw the man from behind and through her window, she couldn't formally identify him. Although there wasn't definitive proof, the growing amount of information pointed to Garrick as the main suspect. Even without direct evidence connecting him to Amandine Estrabad's disappearance, he was the first and only person investigators seriously considered. After questioning him, Garrick was released because there wasn't enough legal justification to hold him. Investigators were also trying to figure out why Garrick was in Amandine's home. Initially, they found no clear link between them. However, some people who knew Garrick said he was interested in Amandine. A friend remembered Garrick calling her attractive and openly showing his feelings. Also, Amandine had a small problem at home, a possible water leak in a room, perhaps while running into him on the street or near her home, and he offered to help, mentioning his construction experience. This could explain why he was in her home without forcing his way in. Her relaxed behavior that day suggests she knew him at least a little. All of these elements led to the first working theory in the case: Garrick might have used the situation as an opportunity to get closer to her. But something went very wrong. The motive, actions, and consequences were still unclear, but a coherent narrative was starting to form. In June 2016, 2 months after Garrick was arrested for abduction and unlawful confinement, the investigation changed course significantly. Weeks after his initial arrest, he was also charged with premeditated murder. This new charge was based on testimonies from several inmates who had been in the same cell block as Garrick while he was awaiting trial. These inmates claimed that Garrick had spoken openly about his role in Amandine's disappearance. One inmate stated that Garrick described abuse-aggressive actions followed by Amandine's death. This inmate provided details that had not been released to the public, suggesting Garrick had direct knowledge of the events. Garrick allegedly confessed to disposing of Amandine's body and hiding her belongings. One inmate reported this information to investigators in a recorded interview. These inmate testimonies were considered credible, especially since no other confessions had been made in the case at that point. Then, Garrick provided 2 hand-drawn maps. The first map showed where he claimed to have buried a body and covered it with lime. The second map showed the coordinates where he said Amandine's jewelry was hidden. Both maps had Amandine's name on them. These maps led to a large search operation in the area Garrick indicated. For several weeks, search teams, including archaeologists from Institut National de Recherches Archéologiques Préventives, searched the difficult, wooded terrain near Ambres. The area was mountainous with steep ravines, streams, and thick vegetation. They used ground-penetrating radar and carefully examined caves and natural pits. However, despite the detailed maps and the extensive search, they found neither a body nor Amandine's jewelry. Later, Garrick changed his account. He claimed the drawings had nothing to do with Amandine's disappearance. Instead, he said they showed his favorite spots for fishing and mushroom picking. He suggested he wrote Amandine's name on them either to keep people away from his spots or to gain respect from other inmates. His lawyers argued that he was deliberately trying to seem intimidating to avoid trouble in prison. Although Garrick later contradicted his initial statements, those statements still carried legal significance. Investigators emphasized that Garrick revealed details that only someone directly involved would likely know. This insider knowledge strongly suggested his involvement, even though he hadn't confessed. The case against him relied not on one specific piece of evidence, but on a combination of factors, circumstantial details that aligned his actions, his words, and information that was unlikely to be known by someone not involved. Over 7 years after Amandine Estrabad vanished, the trial of Garrick Jahano began on October 8, 2020. In the Albi Court of Assizes, Garrick Jahano was charged with kidnapping, illegal imprisonment, and murder. The case was unusual because there was no body, confession, DNA, blood, or any other direct physical evidence. Despite the lack of direct proof, the prosecution thought the indirect evidence was compelling enough to justify presenting the case to a jury. Garrick's alibi had contradictions, and his past statements had inconsistencies. which were part of the evidence presented in the trial. Digital records also raised suspicion. His gaming console, which he used every day, was not turned on the night in question. He claimed he just didn't play, but he had previously told investigators that he spent the evening playing PlayStation. This contradiction was important to the prosecution. Garrick's behavior in court was met with varying reactions. Journalists observed that he seemed uninterested in the trial, refused to look at pictures of Amandine, and didn't react to her mother's emotional statements. When questioned about his feelings while viewing Amandine's picture, Garrick stated that he felt nothing. This seeming lack of emotion strengthened the impression that he was emotionally distant and detached. Several witnesses characterized him as a withdrawn individual who became aggressive when intoxicated, and these observations were officially documented in the court records. Garrick denied all charges. His lawyers argued that the prosecution lacked direct evidence, and that the case relied on speculation. They claimed the prosecution's case was built on guesses, unreliable inmate statements, and indirect evidence. The prosecution responded that the inconsistencies in Garrick's story, the absence of any other reasonable explanation, and Garrick's actions strongly suggested he was involved in a violent event. On October 14, 2020, Garrick Jahano was found guilty by a jury of abducting Amandine Estrabad, unlawfully detaining her, and causing her death. He received a 30-year prison sentence, which he will serve in a high-security prison. The court stated that the evidence presented, even without Amandine's body being found, was compelling and consistent enough to convict him. This case was highly publicized and is one of the few times in French legal history that someone has been convicted of homicide when the victim's body was never recovered. After being initially found guilty, Garrick appealed the decision. A second trial started on November 15, 2021, at the Toulouse Appellate Court in the Haute-Garonne Department. The charges against Garrick remain. The defense argued that he was convicted despite a lack of evidence. One lawyer likened the case to other unsolved disappearances in the area, such as Delphine Jubilars, who disappeared without a trace in December 2020. Like Amandine's case, Jubilars' body was never found. The prosecution, however, restated its arguments. The focus remained on Garrick's questionable alibi, his unaccounted-for movements during the key time window, his inconsistent statements, and his suspicious behavior following Amandine's disappearance. New details also emerged regarding his concerning online activity, highlighting a pattern of obsessive and troubling internet behavior, including viewing content with deviant themes. Prosecutors laid out a likely scenario. Garrick offered Amandine a ride, possibly under the pretext of helping inspect her home after she had mentioned plumbing issues. Once inside, an incident occurred, possibly a confrontation following unwanted advances, which escalated and ended fatally. Defense lawyers denied this version, pointing out that no one saw him leaving the house, and there was no physical evidence of aggression. On the 19th of November, 2021, the appellate court upheld the original verdict. Garrick Jahano was again found guilty. But contrary to the Estrabad family's hopes, the 2021 ruling wasn't the final chapter. In 2022, the Court of Cassation overturned the decision due to a procedural error. One required legal phrase was missing from the court's written justification. Though the omission was technical, it triggered a mandatory retrial. The third trial occurred in January 2024 in Montalban, Tarn-et-Garonne. The prosecution repeated their previous arguments, claiming the amount of circumstantial evidence proved guilt. They again used Garrick's statements from prison, his drawings, and previous inconsistencies in his behavior as evidence. The defense tried to prove Garrick was not at the crime scene and had no connection to the crime was an Eversound. Garrick, who had turned 35 by the time of the hearings, once again denied all charges. In a surprising twist, his mother changed her story, claiming she never said the things attributed to her in the official records. This sudden reversal caused a strong reaction from both the court and the prosecution, as her original statements had played a key role in launching the investigation. Despite efforts by the defense to dismantle the central elements of the case, they were unsuccessful. On the 30th of January, 2024, Garrick Jahano was found guilty for the third time on charges of abduction, unlawful detention, and committing a fatal act against Amandine. He was once again sentenced to 30 years in prison. Later, the Court of Cassation rejected his final appeal, confirming the verdict as legally binding. The disappearance of Amandine Estrabad led to a highly unusual and controversial trial in France, resulting in 3 guilty verdicts, despite the absence of a body, a confession, and direct physical evidence. This case deeply divided the public. Some believed the verdicts were just and essential, while others felt they were based on too little certainty. Legal experts pointed out that the convictions were based on the bundle of clues principle, a legal concept where a collection of individually weak pieces of evidence can, when combined, create a strong case for guilt. While legal in France, this approach naturally raises the question: at what point does reasonable doubt become too significant to ignore? Faenza, an Italian city of roughly 50,000 people, is known for its relaxed atmosphere. Many residents have close relationships built on familiarity and trust. But in early 2021, an event involving Ilenia Fabri severely damaged that sense of trust, especially among those who knew her. On February 6, 2021, at dawn, police received a call from a young girl reporting an attack on her mother at their home in a residential area. Arriving at the villa, officers and paramedics found the front doors open. Inside, they discovered the body of Ilenia Fabri, 46. On the ground floor, she had a severe cut to her throat, along with multiple cuts on her body and head injuries, indicating she had been struck with a blunt object. At first, investigators thought the crime was a robbery that turned violent when Ilenia interrupted the burglar and resisted. But as they examined the crime scene and Ilenia's injuries more closely, the robbery theory seemed less probable. The violence used was too extreme for a typical robbery, suggesting Ilenia was intentionally targeted. The community was shocked and saddened by the news of the tragedy. Ilenia, known as a positive, friendly, and well-liked wife and mother, was highly regarded by everyone. She had many friends, acquaintances, and had worked for years as a secretary at her husband's car dealership. Concerned residents cooperated with the investigation, hoping to find the person responsible, ensure justice, and make their streets safe again. Ilenia seemed like the least likely person to be targeted by such violence. Initially, investigators found no obvious suspects among her close contacts, or at least very few. Seeking to uncover the mystery and identify the killer, detectives began meticulously examining Ilenia's life. They soon learned that she and Claudio Nani had divorced some time before. But their legal battles continued. Over the years, disagreements, exacerbated by financial issues, had strained their marriage. Ilenia, who had worked full-time in the business, believed Claudio had taken advantage of her. After the divorce, she sought substantial compensation, which he resisted, determined to leave her with nothing. Their conflict escalated into a lawsuit, and Claudio further aggravated the situation by attempting to prove his wife's alleged infidelity. He even placed a GPS tracker on her car, hoping to document her movements. But he couldn't prove anything. Ilenia quickly suspected something and discovered the device. She then filed a complaint alleging stalking and invasion of privacy, which only fueled their animosity. Claudio was the main suspect. Police investigated where he was when Ilenia was murdered. He was with his daughter, Arianna Nanni, at his house, which was near Ilenia's villa. Arianna said she arrived early that morning because they were driving to Osnago, Lecco, to get a new car. She confirmed that her father was with her the whole time and didn't leave the house. They had breakfast, and about 30 minutes later, they drove to a nearby city, a few kilometers into their trip. Arianna received an urgent phone call. Besides Arianna's statement, Claudio's phone records, including text messages and location data, supported his alibi. making it seem impossible for him to have committed the murder. Even though he had a strong reason to want Ilenia dead, it looked like he couldn't have done it. Communication with Claudio and Ariana allowed investigators to reconstruct part of the events. They were not far from the city when Ariana received a call from Ariana's friend, who reported that something bad was happening at Ilenia's house. According to him, screams were heard coming from the villa. By coincidence, Ariana's friend had been looking out the window and noticed a large, unfamiliar man entering the property. He looked threatening. Hearing about this, Ariana didn't want to continue the trip and insisted on returning home. It seemed to her that even Claudio was worried. She insisted that they both go back and find out what was happening. At the same time, Ariana kept in touch with her friend on the phone. The girl was very worried about her mother and asked the police to check the house. It took several minutes for Claudio's car to drive up to the villa at full speed. When talking to the police, Ariana repeatedly said that her father was also acting very worried and seemed anxious to find out what was going on. He stopped the car, got out, and went into the house, but ordered his daughter to stay in the car and not to get out under any circumstances. Ariana heard her mother's screams and couldn't restrain herself. She ran out of the car and across the courtyard. Along the way, she dialed the emergency number and called the police, something Claudio hadn't done. Just a few meters from the front door, the screams in the house stopped. When Ariana went inside, she saw her mother lying in a pool of blood, her throat deeply cut. Claudio wouldn't allow his daughter to remain at the crime scene. He took her outside to the car, where they waited for the police to arrive. Even when the carabinieri arrived, Ariana was shaking and hysterical, so shocked by what she saw that she could barely speak. She needed psychological help and time to recover. A little later, they were able to interview her at the medical center. Meanwhile, law enforcement officers were working at the crime scene, carefully analyzing the robbery scenario. However, it almost immediately became untenable. Given the degree of brutality of the attack on Ilenia, the fact that she was chased throughout the entire house, as well as the fact that almost nothing was missing, also didn't align with the behavior of a robber. The strangest thing was that there was no sign of forced entry. This indicates that the attacker knows the door well or has his own key. Ilenia managed to reach the second floor, but there was no escape from there. There were signs of a struggle found on the upper floor. The first drops of blood were found in the bedroom, but she died on the first floor. In her attempt to escape, Ilenia splattered blood up the stairs and into several rooms. The killer caught up with her and finished her off on the lower floor. This also did not seem like the actions of a surprised robber. Having reconstructed the chronology of events, detectives began to focus on two main theories. Either the criminal knew Ilenia and attacked her out of hatred, or she was an accidental victim of someone under the influence of illegal substances or a deranged individual. Almost from the beginning, the police had a description of the killer. After interviewing neighbors, as well as Ariana's friend, several people reported seeing a man breaking into the villa. They all described him as a tall, strong figure dressed in black. Unfortunately, his face was covered by a hood, so a more detailed description was impossible. Faenza had many CCTV cameras, and, curiously, Ilenia's house was also equipped with a security system. However, by another strange coincidence, it was not working that day, making the crime look meticulously planned. One group of detectives analyzed Ilenia's inner circle to understand who might have harbored enough hatred to kill her in broad daylight. Early on, the name of her ex-husband kept surfacing, and suspicions against him grew. Despite his alibi, another group collected data from CCTV cameras throughout the area, analyzing hundreds of hours of video footage. Additionally, all mobile phone records and calls made near the villa that day were meticulously checked. Ilenia's ex-husband, Claudio, appeared to be involved once again, as a closer examination of their relationship revealed it had been toxic for many years. In fact, Ilenia had been subjected to severe emotional and physical abuse by her husband on a regular basis, and had repeatedly contacted law enforcement and filed complaints. The first of these complaints was dated 2017, but the domestic abuse likely began much earlier. The last time she went to the police was just a few days before finally leaving Claudio. Elenia's friends and relatives said their relationship had been troubled for a long time. But Elenia was reluctant to leave her husband for the sake of the child. She believed it was better to raise her daughter with both parents. However, the atmosphere in the house became so toxic that she gradually began to doubt this idea. She left him with a sense of great joy and liberation. From that moment on, she tried to completely sever all contact with Claudio, as he used every opportunity to harass her. The Carabinieri checked all leads and possible suspects, including Arianna. However, she was quickly eliminated as a suspect. As her father and mobile phone data confirmed her innocence, she had no motive and no disagreements with her mother. On the contrary, she was very worried about her. Arianna also didn't believe that her father could be involved. When she first heard the suggestion, she defended him, repeatedly stating that she was in a car with him a few kilometers from the villa when the attack took place. She pointed out that neither she nor her father fit the description of the attacker. The story that the father and daughter were going to Osnago, Lecco, to pick up a new car also proved true, as detectives contacted the dealership Claudio had mentioned, and the manager confirmed his story. However, according to witnesses to their relationship, Claudio was the only person in Elenia's inner circle who had a real motive and the desire to kill. As a result, his calls were tapped and his car was bugged. The last one that could be tracked was made in December 2020. There was also correspondence in the messenger, but they had been deleted and the data could not be restored. This immediately attracted the attention. It was a period of pandemic and lockdown, but Claudio was actively discussing some business with an unknown person. There were several suspicious messages with ambiguous content that the men sent to each other. The owner of the number was identified quite quickly as Pierluigi Barbieri. His background was analyzed, revealing a rather turbulent criminal past with several convictions, including for violent crime. It seemed strange that a man like Claudio, who had his own business, a daughter, and once had a beautiful wife, would associate with such a suspicious and shady character. Pierluigi was quickly located. Living not far from Elenia's house in Faenza, the police immediately apprehended him for questioning. The first thing they wanted to know was his whereabouts at the time of the crime and the day before. Outwardly, he resembled the attacker described by witnesses. Early on, the investigators had a strong feeling they were on the right track. Pierluigi was reluctant to cooperate and wouldn't confirm any connection to the murder. However, his answers were contradictory and ambiguous. He chose his words carefully and hesitated before answering each question, which only strengthened the suspicion against him. The interrogation lasted for hours, but the seasoned criminal knew how to behave under pressure and remained unyielding. They needed something concrete to corner him. Detectives analyzed Pierluigi's mobile phone data and quickly confirmed that he was in the vicinity of Elenia's home when the crime was committed. He left home early in the morning, heading towards Elenia's residence. Next, they reviewed surveillance camera footage from streets along his likely route. A person matching the description was recorded on a parallel street. They investigated the areas where this person in dark clothes might have walked and managed to identify him before he reached the house. The investigation also revealed that a white car had driven past the villa 2 or 3 times in the hours before the murder. The license plate was identified, and the vehicle was registered to Pierluigi Barbieri. While this reinforced their suspicion, none of the cameras captured a clear image of his face. Moreover, investigators believed he hadn't acted alone. They suspected Elenia's ex-husband was involved in the planning, possibly ordering the murder. With Pierluigi as the executor, at the time of his arrest, Pierluigi was a 51-year-old resident of Faenza, with a reputation for aggression and close ties to the criminal underworld. He had served a long prison sentence, released in August 2020, for robbing a hair salon. At trial, he claimed he committed the crime to pay off debts. But it was part of a pattern. The investigation uncovered a similar, but more brutal, Incident: Pierluigi broke into the home of a disabled man, kidnapped him, and forced him to withdraw all his money from an ATM, breaking several of his fingers in the process. The victim didn't report the crime, intimidated and afraid. Given the circumstances of Ilenia's death and these revelations, detectives believe he may have intentionally targeted Ilenia. The attack occurred after Ariana left home with her father to ensure her safety and provide an alibi for Claudio. This was likely Claudio's goal to target only his wife while creating an alibi that protected the rest of the family. The multiple drives past the house by Pierluigi suggest he was waiting for a signal or confirming that only his target was inside. By this point, Claudio's involvement in his ex-wife's murder was virtually certain. They believed he orchestrated and instigated the crime, hiring Pierluigi as the killer. Therefore, they had to have met to discuss the plan and payment, continuing the search for an undeniable connection between Pierluigi and Claudio. Investigators discovered that meetings had taken place in Claudio's garage shortly before the murder. Eventually, Pierluigi Barbieri confessed and began to reveal disturbing details of the brutal attack. He admitted that Ilenia's murder was not a robbery gone wrong. He had originally gone to her house as a hitman hired by her ex-husband, Claudio, who provided him with the keys and carefully laid out the instructions. It was a clear plan, meticulously planned down to the smallest detail. Claudio didn't want their daughter, Ariana, to suffer, but even she was part of his manipulation. Pierluigi and Claudio repeatedly discussed and refined the plan to ensure no delays. Unfortunately, there was no external confirmation of these discussions. Everything happened face to face, leaving no correspondence. The motive wasn't jealousy or hatred. Claudio simply didn't want to share money with his ex-wife. The idea of hiring a killer came when Ilenia filed a lawsuit, demanding fair compensation for her years of work in his workshop. He had never paid her a proper salary, only providing sporadic handouts. As she described it, as a result, she sought approximately 500,000 euros in compensation. From that moment on, Ilenia became a threat to his financial well-being, one he wanted to eliminate. Claudio approached Pierluigi, and they agreed on a price of 20,000 euros and a used car for the murder. As it turned out, this trip to Osnago, Lecco with Ariana, was not a gesture of paternal love. The cunning manipulator used his own daughter as a cover to establish his alibi. Pierluigi revealed another chilling detail. He wasn't supposed to use just any knife. Claudio provided it. It was a ceramic knife he had used to cut a cake the night before the murder. During a small anniversary celebration, after the crime, Pierluigi disposed of the knife. Despite detectives discovering the general location where it was discarded, it was never recovered. Early in the morning, as soon as Ariana left the villa with her father, Pierluigi knew that Ilenia was alone. He calmly entered using the key provided by Claudio. He expected she to still be asleep. This miscalculation led to their plan's partial failure. Ilenia made a noise, attracting the attention of neighbors, and attempted to escape. Pierluigi pursued her upstairs to the bedroom. He initially attacked her with a hammer, striking her on the head. However, the blow was glancing, and Ilenia managed to partially dodge it. Bleeding, she ran up the stairs to the second floor and locked herself in the bathroom. The door could not stop Pierluigi, who was holding the hammer. He broke it down. Ilenia begged for mercy, but he struck her several more times on the head with the hammer, then began to strangle her. Still, she didn't give up. She screamed, fought back, and even managed to break free and run to the kitchen. Then, Pierluigi took out the knife Claudio had given him and began stabbing her repeatedly. The final, fatal blow was a deep cut to her throat. At that moment, the sound of wheels was heard outside. Ariana and Claudio are coming. Pierluigi simply left the house, overturning a few things along the way to stage a robbery. Naturally, this was not enough to fool the detectives. When the details of the crime became public, questions about the problem of femicide in Italy were once again raised. It was revealed that Ilenia had contacted a domestic violence center in 2017. but her pleas were simply ignored. The police's inaction and the impunity enjoyed by Claudio only emboldened his behavior. Subsequent appeals also went unanswered until after the divorce. This led to a conversation about how deeply rooted violence against women is and the major political and societal changes needed to stop it. This sentiment was echoed by detectives and the judge at the subsequent trials. When the police questioned Claudio about the hired killer, he continued to insist on his innocence. During the interrogation, Claudio had an outburst of anger, which only confirmed their suspicions. He quickly cracked and confessed to hiring Pierluigi. However, Claudio claimed that he did not intend for her to be killed, but only wanted to intimidate his ex-wife so that she would drop her financial demands and withdraw her statement. Both criminals were sent to different prisons to await trial. From prison, Claudio wrote a letter to his daughter, Arianna, expressing his regret for what had happened. He claimed he didn't want to kill Ilenia, only to scare her mother. Portraying it as a terrible accident, he claimed he simply chose the wrong person to carry out his plan. In the letter, he wrote that he was ashamed and wished he could disappear. Later, when Arianna was interviewed by journalists, she sided with Claudio, continuing to insist that he didn't want to kill Ilenia. She likely simply couldn't believe it. However, the facts left no room for doubt, and as a result, Claudio Nani and Pierluigi Barbieri were convicted and found guilty of premeditated murder, as well as planning the crime and attempting to obstruct the investigation. Claudio Nani and Pierluigi Barbieri were sentenced to the maximum possible punishment for the charges brought against them: life imprisonment. The sentences were upheld at every level of the judicial system. In January 2024, the Court of Cassation put an end to the legal proceedings, recognizing it as a deliberate and heinous crime. Both men involved in the crime lost any chance of receiving a reduced sentence. Even so, Arianna never lost faith in her father. She continues to try to maintain a relationship with him in every possible way and has also made attempts to have the court's decision reviewed. However, all efforts have been to no avail. Claudio and Pierluigi were also sentenced to pay €2 million in moral damages to Arianna in a civil suit. On October 8, 2003, two fishermen were exploring the coast off Cape May, New Jersey, in their new boat. They hadn't gone far from shore when they noticed something suspicious in the water. Curious, they initially thought it might be a dead animal. As they approached, they realized it was a woman's body. The fishermen immediately contacted law enforcement. The deceased was pulled from the water, and an attempt was made to identify her. Unfortunately, there was no identifying information. She was wearing clothes, but had no identification or distinguishing marks. The victim appeared young, with detectives estimating her to be under 20. Although the time spent in the water made it difficult to be certain, her body was in a deplorable condition, having been submerged for several days. Water accelerates decomposition, and the young woman showed numerous signs of marine life activity. A stone crab was found on her body, consuming the inside of her thigh. According to the forensic expert who performed the autopsy, the body had been adrift for more than a week, possibly even 2. Sea creatures hadn't thoroughly damaged the soft tissues yet. A piece of a large chain was found on her ankles, and her limbs were bound with adhesive tape. There were also signs of a struggle on the body, and investigators suspected she had been abused. However, even a thorough DNA examination proved impossible. As the water had washed away all traces of the perpetrator, the forensic expert believed the body had been submerged for a considerable time, likely near the seabed. The girl had probably been drowned using some form of weight that eventually broke free. Unfortunately, identification of the victims remains limited. Special features and evidence should be carefully examined before being released to the public. Even at this early stage, investigators anticipated that identification would be difficult. The forensic expert continued to examine the body for any clues that might shed light on the mystery of the girl's death. He wanted to know who she was, how she died. No gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or cuts were found. However, A fracture was discovered at the base of her skull. The specialist concluded that the force of the blow that caused this was equivalent to a fall from a height of 5 stories. Investigators attempted to obtain fingerprints, but her extended submersion in water made this challenging. The skin was severely swollen, requiring further processing of her fingertips to obtain reliable prints. Once obtained, the prints were checked against law enforcement databases and matched to a resident of Dover, Delaware, a small town located near Cape May, approximately 60 kilometers away. The victim was identified as 16-year-old Kimberly Holton. 2 detectives assigned to the case immediately went to the house where the girl lived. Her mother, who was intoxicated, opened the door. The woman was unaware of her daughter's whereabouts, as Kimberly had been living with another couple for several years. Through the mother, investigators learned another address. Kimberly lived in a mobile home located in a trailer park. The girl's adoptive mother opened the door to the detectives. As soon as the woman saw the police, she immediately became alarmed, realizing their arrival was connected to Kimberly. She told the detectives everything she knew about the girl. Kimberly had been born on November 4, 1986, and was just short of her 17th birthday at the time of her death. She had a difficult life from the start. Born into a dysfunctional family, her father had been incarcerated for most of her life and was expected to remain imprisoned for a long time due to numerous criminal offenses. Her mother suffered from addiction to illegal substances and alcohol and had long been indifferent to the girl's fate. Some relatives tried to help her in any way they could but lacked the means to adopt her. Despite these challenges, teachers at school described Kimberly as friendly, intelligent, and calm. She loved animals and aspired to become a veterinarian due to her amiable nature. In 2001, some of her parents' distant relatives, Ron Machette and Lorraine Machette, offered her a home in their trailer park. They had a daughter named Heather Nasakaitis, who had always wanted a sister. Thus, Machette managed to fulfill 2 dreams at once and helped Kimberly grow up in a more stable environment. Before moving in with Ron and Lorraine, Kimberly had been trying to find a better living situation. Away from her troubled parents, she even lived with her grandfather for a time, 2 years after moving in with her adoptive parents, who hadn't even formalized the adoption. Kimberly had died. According to Lorraine, she had last seen her adopted daughter 10 days before the police arrived at the trailer park, on September 29, 2003. This timeline confirmed the medical examiner's conclusion that the body had been in the water for a week or 2. Lorraine also stated that she contacted law enforcement the day after Kimberly went missing. Lorraine explained that she wasn't particularly worried during the first few days of her disappearance, as it was normal for Kimberly, a teenager, to run away from home for a few days. Kimberly had done this many times before, often staying with friends for the weekend, but she would always return. It was thanks to this history that the girl was identified by fingerprints. Kimberly had been on the police database for a long time, simply because she had a tendency to run away from home. When Lorraine had gone to the police station to file a missing person report, the officer took the statement, wrote a report, and interviewed those closest to Kimberly. The policeman was interested in whether she had been seen, but he was unable to find any leads. Given her history of running away, the investigation into this case didn't receive enough attention. But time passed, and there was still no news from her until her body was found. It was immediately obvious that Lorraine was worried about Kimberly. Detectives decided to question Lorraine in more detail to understand Kimberly's relationship with those close to her. Investigators were interested in whether Kimberly could be connected to crime, whether she could have any enemies capable of such cruelty. First of all, they suspected Lorraine herself and her husband Ron, who were in the process of getting a divorce. 2 weeks before her disappearance, Kimberly had reported her adoptive father to the police, saying that he had gotten into bed with her and was molesting her. Lorraine confirmed these fears. According to Lorraine, she had noticed more than once that her husband was looking at Kimberly strangely. The act of molestation confirmed that he had an unhealthy attraction to children. His behavior was the reason for the divorce. After this story, suspicions about Ron only grew stronger. At first, Ron became the main suspect. They investigated him very thoroughly and found out he even had an alibi. Then, his words were confirmed. At the time of Kimberly's murder, he was behind bars. Since immediately after Kimberly's statements, he was arrested and charged with harassment. He spent several days in jail. At least during the time frame of the murder, Ron was cleared immediately. He clearly could not have been involved in the crime. The most significant challenge was the length of time the body had been submerged in the water. This likely washed away any traces of the criminal's DNA. Furthermore, forensic scientists in 2003 lacked access to the sophisticated tools available today. Tools that would allow them to carefully examine and collect minute particles of DNA. They were therefore compelled to focus on other evidence. They focused on the chain on the victim's leg and discovered the manufacturer's identification number. This allowed them to trace it to a chain of building supply stores operating on the East Coast. After checking the records, they found that the chain had been sold at one of those stores shortly before the crime. The investigators then located the manager who had made the sale. However, because the store was a supermarket frequented by hundreds of people daily, the seller couldn't recall every customer. Fortunately, the records allowed them to pinpoint the exact time and date of the purchase. Subsequently, the police were able to cross-reference this information with surveillance camera footage. All the cameras were functional in filming and recording. The chain store management cooperated fully, providing the necessary records. It was then easy to identify the two young men who had purchased the chain. The receipt also revealed that they had bought 2 cinder blocks, further solidifying the police's suspicions. Presumably, these weights had been used, along with the chain, to sink the body and hold it at the bottom. For some unknown reason, the pulleys broke, which aided in Kimberly's discovery before marine life could destroy the body. The police obtained images of the main suspects, but they were disappointed to find that the video, taken from a camera positioned under the ceiling, provided a poor angle. From this vantage point, the faces of the young men were not clearly visible, but it was apparent that they were between 20 and 25 years old. This clue prompted them to show the footage to the public and hold a press conference. A few days later, a man came to the police station, claiming to be one of the individuals recorded by the store camera. His name was Robert Brothers. However, he wasn't there to confess. He wanted to clear his name. He was visibly scared and explained that he had only accompanied his friend, Jacob Jones, who had asked him to help carry some heavy items at the hardware store. He confirmed that Jacob had purchased a chain and 2 cinder blocks, without fully explaining their purpose. When Robert inquired, Jacob was evasive but eventually admitted that the blocks were for some impromptu weightlifting. Robert knew that Jacob was suspected of involvement in the murder of a 16-year-old girl and was deeply concerned. Robert requested that his name be kept confidential and provided a detailed account. He maintained that he had merely assisted in carrying heavy items from the hardware store and loading them into his friend's car, and he had no idea what happened to them afterward. This led detectives to their prime suspect, 20-year-old Jacob Jones. Investigators began to investigate how to connect Jacob to Kimberly's family. It turned out that he was Heather's boyfriend. Heather was about the same age as Kimberly, and they had been living together for the past 2 years. Those close to them described the girls as being very close. They became good friends and even shared clothes to resemble twins. Or so they thought. However, some claimed that the girls didn't get along and often argued. Suspicions and circumstantial evidence mounted. When Robert was approached again and asked why Jacob might have killed Kimberly, he suggested that Heather, who was jealous of Kimberly's beauty, could have been involved. Detectives spoke to Heather. She appeared as concerned about Kimberly's disappearance as her mother. However, like the rest of the family, she initially believed that her adopted sister had simply run away again and would soon return. Her concern only grew when her mother contacted law enforcement and reported Kimberly missing. As days passed without Kimberly's return, the situation became increasingly tense. Heather told detectives that after Kimberly's disappearance, she had sought comfort and support from her boyfriend, Jacob, but he had shown complete indifference. Heather perceived this as uncaring and insensitive. but nothing more. She didn't believe Jacob was capable of murder. Even during her initial interview with the detectives, Heather didn't raise any suspicion. She seemed sincere, cooperative, and provided all the information requested of her, claiming to have had nothing to do with her sister's death. Subsequently, Jacob was brought in for questioning. From the outset, he appeared nervous. He admitted to buying the chains and cinder blocks at the store, but claimed that he had used them for other purposes. However, he refused to disclose where they were now. It was evident that he was concealing something. Just moments into the conversation, after they began questioning him more closely about Kimberly, Jacob requested a lawyer and refused to cooperate further. At the same time, Jacob confirmed that he knew about the crime because both Lorraine and Heather had spoken about it. With no specific evidence to present, law enforcement was forced to release him for the time being. Interviews with Jacob's colleagues and friends revealed that he had been acting unusually lately. He had become short-tempered, aggressive, and prone to lateness or even absenteeism, behaviors that were out of character for him. No one in Jacob's social circle could explain this sudden change. Just 2 weeks after Kimberly's body was recovered from the water, Heather and her boyfriend, Jacob, were having lunch at a cafe. Heather directly asked Jacob if he had been involved in her sister's murder. His reaction was peculiar. According to Heather, he responded that his lawyer had forbidden him from discussing it with anyone. Heather was shocked. She had expected a more open response, an angry denial of guilt, or something else that would demonstrate his innocence. At that point, Heather began to suspect that Jacob was acting suspiciously. Despite her growing doubts, she still found it hard to believe that her boyfriend could have committed such a brutal act as killing her sister. Detectives decided to investigate Jacob's background more thoroughly. At the time of the crime, Jacob was 20 years old and had recently graduated from high school. By most accounts, he seemed like a good person. He had even earned his pilot's license at 16 and always dreamed of flying. He seemed like a promising young man, and his qualifications were unusual for someone so young. He appeared responsible and had no history of violence. However, disturbing information soon surfaced. Several witnesses confirmed that Jacob and Kimberly did not get along. Kimberly often picked on him, even in Heather's presence, constantly calling him Four Eyes because he wore glasses. Some people knew she teased him because he wanted to become a fighter pilot, and she mocked his vision problems, insisting he would never succeed. They had even had arguments about it. The more the detectives investigated the relationship between the two, the clearer it became that Kimberly frequently teased and irritated Jacob. However, this still didn't seem like enough of a reason to kill her. But the coincidences were mounting and becoming too obvious to ignore. Detectives obtained a warrant for Jacob's arrest and immediately went to his house. As the police approached, they noticed suspicious activity. Jacob's parents were outside. His mother was hysterical, and paramedics were inside. Jacob had shot himself in the head with a shotgun minutes before the police arrived, dying instantly. The dead boy's father spoke to the detectives, revealing that Jacob had confessed to killing Kimberly Holton the day before. At the same time, Jacob claimed that another person, 23-year-old Michael Kaiser, whom he had met while working as a security guard at the racetrack, was also involved. Jacob referred to himself as an accomplice, shifting most of the blame onto Michael. Michael and Jacob weren't particularly close, but their paths often crossed at work. Michael was easily located and expressed shock that his friend had taken his own life. However, he denied being the mastermind behind Kimberly's murder, claiming he was only an accomplice. He insisted that Jacob had forced him to commit the brutal act, describing Jacob as a dangerous, cruel, and manipulative person who should be feared. Michael immediately invoked his right to a lawyer and initially refused to cooperate with the investigation. However, with a little pressure, he began to talk. According to Michael, the motive was Kimberly's constant embarrassment, mockery, and humiliation of Jacob, often in front of Heather. Jacob had simply grown tired of it. Michael claimed that Jacob even avoided going to Heather's house if Kimberly was there. However, The detective suspected that this wasn't the whole truth. It seemed strange that a young man as driven as Jacob, who had earned his pilot's license at 16, excelled in school and at the University of Delaware, and worked as a freelance flight instructor at the Air Force Base, would simply throw his life away. Unfortunately, Jacob, the only one who could provide his side of the story, was dead. Detectives pressed Michael for a more truthful account. According to him, on the night of September 29 to 30, he and Jacob picked up Kimberly from the trailer park, where she lived with her foster family. Jacob instructed Michael to do this because he didn't want to be identified by any witnesses in the area. Michael was then supposed to take Kimberly to a secluded house so Jacob could discuss their differences with her. Initially, Michael believed that Jacob simply wanted to scare her and make her stop bullying. According to Michael's version of events, they then went to a store near a building supply center, where Jacob, Michael, and Kimberly bought alcohol and snacks. Afterward, the three went to a nearby motel. There, the discussion quickly escalated into intimate. Michael claimed that they had intimate with Kimberly, one after the other, with her mutual consent. Afterward, Kimberly went to the shower, and when she came out, Jacob suddenly attacked her, pinning her to the floor and choking her. She lost consciousness after receiving several blows. Michael claimed that Jacob kicked her. Michael said he tried to stop Jacob, but Jacob was stronger and pushed him aside. After Kimberly stopped showing signs of life, Jacob forced Michael to help him secure her ankles with duct tape and wrap her in a blanket. They then attached a chain and cinder blocks to her leg. They loaded the body into the trunk of Jacob's car and drove to the air base on the outskirts of town where Jacob worked. They then loaded the body onto a plane that Jacob used and took off, flying over the Atlantic Ocean. Jacob descended and slowed down. Michael helped throw the body overboard. Detectives believe that this action ruined their plans. As the body was dropped from too high an altitude, the strong impact of the water caused the cinder blocks to break and detach from the chain, and the body sustained a fracture at the base of the skull. The medical examiner determined that the injury was sustained posthumously from a fall from a great height. This version of Michael's confession also seemed unconvincing. It seemed strange that a conversation intended to clarify the relationship would suddenly lead to intimacy. It also seemed implausible that Jacob would spontaneously attack Kimberly when she came out of the shower. After all, there was no obvious reason for it at that moment. The supposed conflict had seemingly been resolved. Therefore, Michael's confession did not inspire confidence in the police. However, the second part of the confession, regarding the disposal of the body, it seemed more credible. It aligned with the fact that Kimberly's body remained undiscovered for a little over a week before being found near the coast. Michael's story about the body being dropped from the air was officially corroborated when the radar data tracking the flight from the airfield was reviewed. It confirmed that they had indeed left the airbase. That night, the plane flew close to the area where the body was later found, made a wide circle, and returned to the base early in the morning. After searching the dorm room where Jacob was staying, the police found a motel receipt dated September 30. The day Kimberly was killed, detectives spoke to Heather again and told her Michael's story. She also believed he was lying and had, in fact, orchestrated the whole thing. She had only ever heard bad things about Michael, describing him as violent and suspicious. Heather was sure that Kimberly hated Jacob, so there was no way she would have had consensual intimate with him or with Michael. Heather was certain that Michael's story was mostly a lie. At the very least, she believed that he had abused Kimberly and was now trying to justify his actions by claiming mutual consent and blaming Jacob, who could no longer refute his accusations. Only 2 days after Michael's arrest, during a routine morning check, a guard discovered that he had attempted to end his own life in his cell, using his shoelaces. Fortunately, he was found in time, with a pulse still beating. Michael was taken to the mid-sanction unit for treatment and then transferred to a ward for rehabilitation and recovery. His actions were regarded as a cowardly attempt to avoid justice, prompting psychiatric evaluations to assess his mental state. Michael was then placed under observation due to the high risk of repeated his own life attempts. In January 2004, the trial began, where Michael was tried for complicity in the murder of Kimberly Holton. The prosecution presented a considerable amount of evidence, though almost all of it was circumstantial. Michael then retracted his confession, and his lawyer attempted to explain it away as a result of insanity. His story about his own life attempt sounded particularly compelling. The prosecutor, however, emphasized that the confession contained many details that had never been published but were verifiably true. He argued that only someone involved in the crime could have known those details. Numerous witnesses testified, corroborating the chronology of events as described by Michael. While awaiting trial and afterward, Michael underwent several evaluations by specialists. Psychiatric experts deemed him extremely immature for his age and easily manipulated, which, they argued, explained his participation in the crime. Experts say that Michael, as a henchman, was simply an accomplice who could not resist Jacob's threats. Crucially, Jacob had a clear motive. Michael was repeatedly offered a plea deal for second-degree murder, which would have resulted in an 18-year prison sentence. However, he consistently refused, convinced that he would be acquitted of murder charges. Throughout this time, he maintained his innocence. Even his lawyer believed he should accept the prosecutor's offer, but Michael adamantly refused. On January 16, the jury began deliberations and ultimately found Michael Kaiser guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. He was, however, fortunate in a way, as the state increased penalties for such charges a few years later, meaning he could have faced the death penalty. From the beginning of his imprisonment, Michael frequently incurred disciplinary infractions. He was caught with contraband on several occasions and was periodically placed in solitary confinement due to his problematic behavior. Currently, Michael remains in custody at the correctional center. His lawyer has made multiple attempts to challenge the court's decision, but all appeals have been rejected. Heather was never charged with any crimes related to the case. Despite some believing, she also had a motive to eliminate her annoying sister. Heather has since moved to Colorado, started a new life, and graduated from college. She, along with her mother, Lorraine, has spoken to reporters on several occasions. They grieved deeply for 16-year-old Kimberly. They believe that the two young men had brutally harmed Kimberly out of enjoyment or out of resentment, but they continue to blame only Michael for this. Her family tried to assist Kimberly, who was born to addicted parents associated with crime, but they were unable to do so.